Greetings, Earthlings. This is Jason Bosch, and today I'm here with Alison McDowell, surprise, surprise, and Cliff Gomes. And we wanted to have a little discussion about community, dialectics, polarity. What else, Alison? Let's talk.
Well, we've been meaning to have this conversation, I think, for a while. And I think we wanted to take a minute to acknowledge the passing of Nikki Rapana, who is a very long-time activist in the space who did a lot of really significant research in the Seattle area into the particulars around Agenda 21 and how it was manifesting in her community. And, it's kind of emotional because those of us who are doing this work, right, and we're not doing it because we're getting paid to do it. It's just you walked in the door, you're living in a community, a space, and you see things that aren't adding up, and then you start looking, right? And so for those of us who have sort of walked that road, we can acknowledge the, intensity of that journey. And so we want to express condolences to her family and her loved ones and her friends, and to, use this as an opportunity to sort of look a bit at the legacy of the things that she was talking about in terms of communitarianism, because I think early on, Jason, you and I both were engaged with a community that sort of identified as anti-communitarian, and the way in which our view was somewhat a different lens. We were using a different lens. And I've seen recently in the past 2 or 3 weeks with the introduction of these soul-bound tokens, one of the 3 authors of the soul-bound token paper was, I think, his last name is Weil, and he's the head political economist strategist from Microsoft, and actually lives in Kirkland, Washington, so in the greater Seattle area. And, I'm seeing very clearly how the propaganda and messaging is going to be weaponizing the idea of community and networks towards this blockchain future, right? And so navigating this thread of teasing apart the propaganda that's being overlaid onto the Agenda 21 structure, but doing so in a way that doesn't actually abandon the idea of community, I think is important. And so situating that in Seattle and what is coming with the collectivist outlook that certain people with another lens might identify as being anti-United States or coming from out there. I think you and I have a different take on it. So, I put together a small number of slides, and I know, Jason, you've been reviewing some of the work that Nikki had done. And yeah, we just want to sort of hold space for her legacy, and, use this opportunity to offer up another view, or not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a separate view. We're not asking people to choose sides, but just to sort of respect some of the things that we're adding into the conversation, because I think the dialogue around individual rights and community is really something that is complex, and it expands beyond the anthropocentric lens that we often have been forced to adopt this past 2 years, because it's come on so heavy in terms of bodily autonomy. It's been very centered on our individual rights around our bodies. But increasingly, as this pivots into the climate narrative and these Green New Deals and the introduction of big data, synthetic biological technologies, that we need to expand our understanding of community beyond simply our human relations to one another to a broader lens, both at like the micro nano level and then the macro biodiversity level. And then, it's complicated.
And so we also have Cliff Gomes with us, who's been a friend and we've done some stuff with, and he was actually out with us in Utah.
Yeah. Well, and part of the reason Cliff is someone who's given me a lot of support and a lot of tools in my toolbox over the past couple of years, because we've all, it's been traumatic. It's been traumatic for everybody, and we're all sort of making our way. So how do you use even the idea of having a lens and like looking through and trying, holding space for different options has been really great. And so I think Jason, you and I and Cliff, among others, we've all sort of had losses and challenges, and then you come back and you try to reconstruct community. Because I think for me, that's the beauty of life, is in those interconnections. And I think part of my challenge with addressing this idea of communitarianism is that embedded in that is the word community. And I think at certain points, people were challenging you because you advocated for community, that you must be a communitarian. And so there's this complexity in the word spells. And we know that these individuals, they use, they co-opt terms, they use words to affect the polarities and advance the agendas they want. So like within the broader discussion of community, communitarianism, I thought it might be helpful for us just to also hold a little space for like our own journeys in trying to build community in these digital platforms that are pretty weaponized, really, and challenging, because we've also encountered things that were unsettling, right? Things that we thought were one way ended up not being that way through these digital portals. And so it's been wonderful that at least the three of us all met in person, so we can all attest that we're not avatars. and we walked out on some wonderful
holographic technology has come a long way, Alison.
So I don't know, Cliff, do you want to build off on that at all?
Yeah. I just want to take a moment and say about Nikki Rapana's passing that I really learned a lot from her. So Nikki had a view around communitarianism, and it was helpful to me to look through the lens that she was looking through. It opened up a whole field of information that I was really unaware of. And for me, in community, there's real value in that. It's not that I have to agree or disagree, but I just appreciate somebody stretching out. And hers was a very well-researched view. So that was helpful. And I tried to fit it into my own way of looking at all of this. Sometimes what I notice, whether it was with Nikki or someone else, is once they had developed a view, they stayed inside of it and tried to cause everything to fit that particular view, or to appear inside of their primary lens, maybe in Nikki's case, communitarianism. And but I have this sense that while honoring the different views that people bring, that it might be more helpful to us in a community space to have more allowance for views and look at them together, as opposed to try to draw us all together in agreement about what the right view is. And so that's, really what I appreciated about Alison as well, was her particular view. And I watched your view, Alison, broaden over time to be more inclusive. You didn't say you knew what the story was. You said, I found an element of the story. Let's take a look. And then you began putting it together. At no point did you really say, this is the right way to consider this. You were actually, it seemed to me, drawing from references that got further and broader and wider, trying to piece together what is the story, what is really happening here. Not just trying to pick a view and then try to have your view be the dominant view. So it felt kind of open and inclusive. It felt warm and inviting. And I really appreciate it. And also, your view in particular, I felt a strong sense of support for how you were looking at this. And in part, I'm trying to describe the diplomacy, the kind of openness that your inquiry was engaging. So you held it open. You weren't trying to come to a point and stop. I guess the reason that I say that is if you come to a place where you're like, I'm sure now this is the correct view, then you're just left saying my view is right and your view is wrong. And everything is either right or wrong based off of this view, this fixed point that you've landed on. Because once it's done, it's kind of done. And all there is now is to defend it, or, it's a thing. I've always appreciated about you that you just kept allowing for new information to shift into a broader landscape. And it didn't get your as a mom, as someone standing in for natural life, for children, it didn't get narrowed down. It seemed like it opened up, but I didn't lose track of your kind of place in this, which was coming from a place of, honoring and respecting and allowing for natural life and for just, this kind of mother's perspective of caring for the world, caring for the environment, caring for our children. And I just felt a really strong sense of that. So so for me, a lot of value in what I learned from Nikki online. I didn't know her, but I learned a lot from listening to her. But for me, that's just part of who she is for me. I used to watch this other part of her, which was these interactions she had with her grandchildren. And I saw that a huge part of her life, she's not just a one-track person. She's not just a conversation about communitarianism. In every image I saw of her, she was either holding the hand of a grandchild or building a bathroom for people that were coming. She was creating community space on her land. So, for me, I hold her as a kind of and some of her familiar commitments and views were, I think, probably the most essential parts of her. Her love for her family, I think, was probably at the center of her worldview. And then there was the conversation on communitarianism. So I'm not a scholar around any of this, but when I talk about it, I'm not narrowing who she was down to her stance on communitarianism. I saw a mother, a grandmother, an elder, an activist, and somebody in touch with the four-leggeds and chickens and deep walks in the forest, all these things. And so I just want to take a minute in my own way and honor her passing. And the work that she left behind, which I think enriched the conversation, while acknowledging the broader community that she gave herself to, and all of her contributions. So in my way of holding her, it's okay to talk about communitarianism a little bit. I'm not poking at Nikki Rapana. I see this beautiful flower of aspects and commitments, and I have only appreciation for her. But the conversation she had is important because we're trying to move towards something. So with respect, to have an open conversation about community, including her views, while honoring them. But we want to lean into that a little bit today.
Yeah, and I want to just say something a little bit about a reaction that some people might have to what you said about the way Alison approaches this content and this material, because she is open, but also I know a lot of times she does take a hard line on certain issues, and some people might think, well, that's, she's closing people off, she's shutting people down. And what I would just say about that is she's trying to have a very specific conversation about very specific issues and information that she's uncovered. And a lot of times people that are coming at her and coming at this are wanting to have a different conversation. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Alison, but like from what I understand, you're saying, it's okay, you can have that conversation, but that's not the conversation that I'm having, and the idea that these things that you're bringing up need to be incorporated into people's understanding and into the conversation. And as I've watched these conflicts happen online, I think that was kind of the primary thing, is that people weren't incorporating this new information and weren't wanting to have different conversations. Like with the blockchain space, for example, a lot of people are promoting, an investment or something that they're invested in as a solution, and that's a different conversation than looking at the landscape and looking at what this actually, the problems with it and how it's being used for other things. So I just wanted to kind of just throw that out there, that like even though you block people and it appears that you're closing off, and I know you've been accused of like, oh, she just doesn't want to have anybody that challenges her views. Well, I mean, that's not really the case from what I've seen, is because overwhelmingly it's not people wanting to have this conversation that we are, 2.5 years into this thing. We're still desperately trying to have this conversation to incorporate all of these things into it. And it's like there's another narrative out there. There, not just one, there are many narratives out there. And communitarianism is one of those narratives, the anti-communitarianism, which, by the way, I the last couple of days I've been rereading like Nikki's work, and I agree overwhelmingly with like the concern she has and what she's saying about this thing. But I do have a different framing of the bigger picture, and particularly in regards to like dialectics and polarization and framing. So we are trying to have a conversation here that, we invite people to join us in this conversation.
Well, can I just say something too? I mean, I think this is part of the community conversation, is how do we have, there's new social norms with this digital world. And, maybe before the lockdowns, people might dabble in and share vacation photos or whatever online. And then during this other time, people became much more invested in relationships between people they only knew, like mostly in online spaces. And many of those spaces, people, had large groups of friends, or on Twitter, like there's really no limit to who's out there. And so the idea of the old-fashioned version of in community, meaning, someone in your city that you might meet up with for, a hobby or a civic interest, or your family, or at the baseball, little league, or in the park, like those kinds of that community where there were understood social norms. And then, like, if you had a falling out with someone, or, you met somebody and it turns out they really weren't, didn't sync, like then you didn't have to necessarily see them again, right? Like you could sort of disconnect in ways that were like, you could set boundaries, you had more choice. And then in these online spaces, as everyone casts these really wide nets, or many of us searching for this community, then it becomes less clear, like how do you set boundaries, especially for, I think, people who became voices. Like for myself, I think, I'm not certainly a big fish in any way, but like I became a resource, right? And then for me to be able to set boundaries. And then when I would set boundaries, it was perceived of in a certain way. So it just, the complexity of digital community. And as this emerges and evolves, and then, soon there will be new aspects to it that involve, logging in with a universal ID, to authenticate yourself to the machines and other people. Like it's going to get even more complicated. I don't have all of the answers, and I'm not, again, in any way sort of, we all have our own journeys. Like we're all on our own journeys. And Cliff, I just wanted to build off of one of the things you were saying about the expansion. Like for me, the latest thing is like fungal networks and like economics of, like molecular economics. It keeps getting bigger, right? Not everybody's comfortable with that. I get that. That's fine. Like, at this point, like the bigger I go, my interest group gets shrinking, because they're like, Alison, why are you putting fungus on there? And this other, like, why are you putting these random videos on your page? And I'm like, because it's interesting to me, but you don't have to be interested. I'm not asking you. But I think, Jason, I had mentioned when we talked yesterday about setting this up, John Trudell, who is a leader in the American Indian movement that we, really helped me early on have some ideas. He spoke about the difference between thinking and believing, and that his contention was it was better to be a thinker, an active critical thinker, than a believer. And his thought process was that once you came to believe something, and often that information was given to you by an outside authority, then people would simply inhabit that space of believing and then not actively pursue incorporating new information. They just would sort of find their space there. They would believe that, and that's the space they stayed in. And that John Trudell felt that thinking was a more active process where you had to take responsibility and exert your agency and then keep moving. And so for me, that really resonated. And I understand the dynamic, given all the upheaval, that people really are looking for things to believe. Like they're really clinging because everything feels like it's spinning out of control. And so there is this very human need to sort of find a grounding, find a thing, and hold on to that thing really tightly, because you need that anchor point.
Yeah, so building on what you just said, Alison, referencing John Trudell about believing and thinking and fungal networks, I think it's really interesting. I'm sure you're going to have a slide coming up later, but I'll just poke into it a little bit now. I think this idea of belief is a construct that has been pushed like on purpose. Like I think there's an apparatus around us that is purposefully weaponizing. There is a human need for, it's just kind of like asking for a little bit of certainty about something. Is there something I can believe in? It's really just kind of, is there a place I can stand where I can like feel comfortable standing there a little bit? So I think there's that's an innate thing in humanity, but I also think it's being weaponized. So in other words, that the apparatus, the media apparatus that's out there, whatever its purposes are aiming consciousness to come and land on a belief. Come stand. Here's the platform that we should all believe in, and using it to control the greater population by narrowing down our purpose as to simply arrive at what's true. And what you can believe and what the truth is, right? And we know that's a weaponized space, and so that, during times of conflict, they ask us to all come to some super simple-minded reason for why we're doing something, right? And then once everybody's there and we all believe it, now we just hang on to that spot, and anybody with another view is like the enemy, right? So it's a real way of kind of like collapsing people's capacity for thought down to and it's not you're just asked, it is demanded, and you are pushed to come arrive at this place of this is what I believe, and you're being pushed by something, right? It's not internal. Internally there's a question, I'd like a little certainty. That's being co-opted, and you're being driven to bring that question about certainty to a place and stand there and say you believe, and then raise the flag and show everyone that you believe. And now you get to belong. They hang belonging, which is the deepest human need. They hang belonging on what you believe. And they will take it away from you if you don't believe but it's a weaponized narrative coming at us. Twofold, mechanically, to get us to come stand on a little platform called I believe. There's a reason they want us to believe that particular belief. So there's a story out there pushing. What I love about your work, as you broaden it out through fungal networks and soul tokens, is we begin to see that there are these pressures and forces actively being engaged to shape reality for us and trying to shape someone's belief. And so not a lot of information needs to be given, just a big image of the American flag and a thing, one celebrity with great boobs, and one intelligent guy in a white coat is supposed to be our rationale for accepting this belief. But when you're there, they've trained us to be, assholes. Like we are unkind in that place. Anybody who's not there, we will cut them out of belonging, out of our own family. I mean, that's how detrimental it is to land people in a place and say, now that you're there and you belong, nobody on the outside of it is safe, right? I just recently had family members declare and hold the flag that you're a cultist of some kind and you are unsafe. So they've got this framing for me, and I don't belong, right? And there's no way in because it's based on my history. So it's all settled. And you don't believe what we believe. So the familial bonds at the closest, most intimate level are being shattered by us being corralled into this system which asks us to take this simple-minded stance of I believe, and then join with those who do and smash all comers. It's, that's a constructed community. But when you go look at a fungal network, nobody's trying to be right. They're just all trying to move things. They're like, oh, and you can, like one of your videos I watched, they're just trying to move things, and then the whole thing will stop. Maybe we can move it this way. And it's all in a reciprocal dance and elegant, like they're bringing little tiny elements of phosphorus that might have originated in stars and landed on the earth, and they're finding ways to transfer it. Can we get it into biology this way? Because I think because biology wants it. They're giving into biology, and in return, they're riding that biology. They're strengthening biology and then following the flow out. So to look past what's the word? Just kind of a human psychological stance. Belief on its own. I stand on a platform. Here's my flag. Y'all are dead if you're not on the platform. That's a psychological stance. And we're saying, come back to natural life a little bit. Nobody does that in natural life. Nobody yells at everybody else. I've got the answer, and unless you agree, you can come here. No, everybody's trying to give something into the overall system that allows for their expansion while encouraging the expansion of what it is that they're giving to. So I talked for a few minutes. So I don't need to believe what Nikki Rapana believed to welcome her into the ecology of voices that I listen to. Right? If I do a belief thing with her, she's either in or she's out. I'd rather include her and her views and look from my own perspective, what's helpful? What can I use that she taught me to kind of like expand the story that I'm doing, and not narrow it down and break it off in a dogfight. And it gets, this is this conversation about community. It starts in our families. Like, so if most of us now, plenty of us now, are at the effect of this constructed psychological thing called come believe here, and at the cost of the familial bonds with our most intimate family members. It's a kind of shattering. And so we'd like to be able to talk about it openly and say, hey, let's come out of our view a little bit. Let's be more accepting of all these views. Look at the way that life itself is doing it. Life itself isn't doing that. Look, I have a little flower garden outside my thing. Nobody has a flag saying, I've got the right answer. They're all just like, interacting, flowing. So, I think we can learn from life itself. That's why I like the references to John Trudell. That's why a distillation of thinking, oh, my heater just came on, Jason. Can you hear it?
Yeah, it's kind of loud.
So, okay, let me shut it.
I thought it was a motorcycle there for a second. There. Do you get what I was saying, Allison, though? I was kind of wanted to head off because I know what some people would be like, well, Allison's not inclusive,
Oh, no, but fine.
I actually see past the argument that started around her blocking people. I see that her view in general is inclusive. I felt like her blocking was just like, if people are going to come in and be dismissive, argumentative in these ways, they're going to interrupt this investigation that she's doing, that she has more commitment to the opening of this story than she does to satisfy in argument whether she's right or somebody else is. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah. So and the way I see it is, it's like, there's
take a couple of minutes and then we'll shut down.
It takes a minute. Okay, yeah, because I was like, it's still going, by the way.
Yeah.
The way I saw it was like, I believe in. I'm totally anti-censorship, but I also think we need more curated conversations because there's so much noise out there, and then people can come in and and then it just you get lost in all of the noise, and we're trying to zero in on focus on what we feel is actually really important and relevant to what's going on. And it's not saying that people can't have those other conversations. It's just saying that I think we do need to have some more focused conversations that address some of these issues. And they're a lot of times they're just two totally different conversations that are being had. And so, to come into someone else's space and say, I'm not going to incorporate anything that you're saying into my understanding, but I want you to like have a conversation about the thing that I'm having a conversation about. And it's like, well, I mean, I can do that if I want, but I think people should, have the right to say, no, actually, that's not really what I'm talking about. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's been very frustrating, because it's like, even for me personally, I'm totally anti-censorship, but I don't think blocking people on your personal page or moderating the comments is actually censorship. Like, I think you should. I do think we need more curated spaces and conversations, in addition to everyone having the absolute right to form community and to have conversations. It's a complex thing, because we all want to come together, but we also it's not just a
but maybe not. I mean,
it's not just
offense.
it's not just a
together over on the same thing.
It shouldn't just be a free for all. And then factor in the fact that on these online spaces, there are a lot of bots. There are a lot of people that I know are working with intelligence. I mean, we already know that corporations, intelligence organizations, governments are playing a very significant role in shaping and steering these conversations online. So factor that in as well. So it's a really difficult thing to kind of navigate. So anyways, that was just, I wanted to put that out there.
I heard you talking about relational dynamics and trying to find some inside of like our human communities, these online communities, trying to find some kind of relational dynamics that allow for a broad conversation. But we can't do them in the space of like attack and argument without like trying to like create some boundaries for ourselves. And again, I can look to nature for elegant relational dynamics, because nature is not separate from us. It is the life that we are a part of. It's just a different view, a different way of expressing, but it's also the life that's here. Like, we belong. Talk about community. We belong to the community of life itself. And so sometimes I worry about the online forums. We get so narrowed into human psychology. And then, as you were saying, Jason, that is being taken advantage of to move the human population, right? It's just being used. I mean, I don't know all the answers to it, but it's like, it's been weaponized. Human psychology has been weaponized in order to control the narrative. And Alison's been doing this work on everything from the original camera all the way up through these things. And I loved it, because it was really opening up how the view itself shaped from a camera, so into eventually controlling your mind's view, right? Using image and media to control the view of in your own mind. So it's one thing to say, and interesting, it's a camera, but then to put it to use eventually, massive digital media, surround sound, some kind of thing over your face, that's no longer about an interesting image. That's about controlling what it is that you're seeing and what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and what you're agreeing to. So I like pushing it out. I love Alison's new push out to, including natural life, looking at lenses, anyway, I just always grow in my awareness in listening to her work. So I personally, whether I agree with her or not, I would never try to like argue with her to throw her off. Like, she's this like lovely mom on this super interesting journey. And once in a while I'm like, I'm not going to go down that track. But then there's all beautiful stuff that interests me. It's just like out of my area of interest, or it's a particular detail that I don't follow, but I just kind of keep wanting to make room for her, because she comes home with this basket full of the most interesting things that support
and I just want to intersect that it is a collaborative effort on my part, because a lot of this new material is actually coming through collaborations I have with my friend Steffers, who's blogging, and this other woman, Jen, who's been looking into the radiation stuff, and then Leo Saraceno, who we just did a recent interview with, and he's very much about the blockchain and the nature. So there is this synergy. And so you can have online connections and collaborations that are very highly productive and that feel good and that are on the best possible version of that, right? So there's always the two different sides of things. They're the difficult social relationships, and then there are the productive ones, and the ones that make you feel more connected. So I mean, I guess this is just our
empowering, nurturing, supportive, contributing, holding space for. There's all these beautiful ways to interact with community online. We're just trying to avoid a little bit the kind of hard line where we all have to stand up and vote and somebody gets to be right or wrong. And, and if people are going to come at me that way, I would kind of be like, I'm not going to do a conversation with you. I want to be in conversation with people who are open, listening, empowering, contributing, nurturing. It's just like you were saying, Jason, relational dynamics that actually allow me, my life, to move and continue and open and do my thing, that makes room for me, that allows for me. And when I look to this latest, we're going to talk a little bit about the microbiome, right? It's this, you talk about a community getting along, right, on behalf of us, right? I mean, there is this, I don't even have language for how complex the relationships are in the microbiome, all for the purpose of supporting our lives, right? It's incredible. Alana Freeland wrote the book Geoengineering. Anyway, she had this image on the front, and it was about a single cell. I think it's called a eukaryotic cell. And it was an image of a powerful microscope looking at a single cell. When you opened up inside it, it was like a universe of stuff. It's complex. So life is managing manifestation, conversation, blooming in the presence of intense complexity, right? When you look past the skin of a leaf and get down into the cell, it gets more rich, more varied, more community. Like, it's incredible. 37.1 trillion cells in the human body. That's a community that you call you. I mean, like, honestly, it's a community that you call you. And in your microbiome, I don't know the numbers, but there's, like, Alice can probably speak to it. There's a bunch of stuff that's not even you, right? That's you as community. So where we tie ourselves into natural life. Yeah.
When I think one of the big differences between, like, for me personally, when I talk about community, I am not talking about governments. I'm not talking about corporations, nonprofits, NGOs. I am absolutely opposed to these dead bodies, these corpses, these legal corpses, that are making decisions on behalf of, theoretically, on behalf of the world or humanity or anything. I am absolutely not talking about that. I'm talking about, it actually is important that we recognize that we are kind of in this together, and a lot of the ideas that what would be phrased communitarian, there actually are things that I absolutely agree with, that we are doing incredible harm to the planet. There are things within that are really important to acknowledge and address, not in the way that they're doing it, but I'm saying don't throw out that problem, which needs to be addressed. And the interesting thing about Nikki was, she talked a lot about the Hegelian dialectic, and yet the idea of, like, the individual rights versus community rights or human rights as being these two oppositional things is a dialectic, and it's a problematic dialectic because my approach to this is the individual and the community are both extremely important, but not as an enforced thing, using money, property, power, government as systems of domination, because ultimately the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals or the World Economic Forum or these bodies or governments, these bodies that are promoting these ideas don't actually care about the environment. They don't actually care about community. It's just a marketing tool for them. It's just something that they use to sell it to a certain segment of the population. And that was the problem that I had with the communitarian framing, was that's a sliver of it. That's a marketing that they're using to market to certain people. But there's another aspect to this where they're actually using private property and individualism to promote to take you to the same place. So there's different, they target different people with different approaches, and so there's a focus which she was absolutely correct that this is a piece of it. It's a major piece of it. It's a major piece of it, but it's not the only piece of it. And that was kind of one of my conflicts, and I really regret that I didn't follow through and actually have that conversation, because I meant to do a show about isms in general, because I wanted to talk about socialism, capitalism, fascism, communitarianism, which kind of puts these, this, they take little pieces of this picture and zero in on it. But there are dialectics within that. And so just the idea of a dialectic, from my understanding, and I might be wrong because I haven't read Hegel from its source, but it was very useful for at least from my understanding of my framing of the world, because I saw like the Democrat versus Republican, the individualist versus someone who cares about the commons and the environment and community as being pit against one each other. And so that is the dialectic. You have the thesis, the antithesis, and depending on which side you're on, this person's thesis might be this person's antithesis, but together it makes a synthesis. And for me, in terms of problem solving, I realized that a lot of these things are manufactured and constructed, and that actually the solution is completely outside of that frame. And it's ironic because a lot of like the writing that I read from Nikki Rapana actually addressed this. She actually says, you need to not take sides. And yet there was a promotion of at least one of those dialectics, which I feel is problematic, and that the primary one being the individual and property rights and markets versus community, the environment. Anyway, so like I see that as a dialectic in and of itself that's problematic. So, okay, that was long, but Alison, I know you have some slides.
Oh yeah, I do have some slides. And just as far as the dialectic, I know a lot of this traces back to, the Rio summit and the Agenda 21, and then before that, the United Nations founding. But I've been talking a lot about the World Sensorium book and the use of polarity, which is the Hegelian dialectic, right? The creation of this destabilizing energetic force to get to this agenda. So it's all sort of dovetailing, and it has been for some time, and whether it all falls under the same umbrella or not, I think that that's useful. So I frame this community. Let's talk a little bit about community, because I feel like we shouldn't just turn our backs on the idea of community. And that's sort of a temptation if you make the idea of community a toxic framing, which I think that particular ism treads into that area a bit. And so I just tweeted and I said, just because right now the idea of social good, so in the past several years, it's been there's this public health imperative, you need to do this for the common good. That's been clearly the very strong narrative framing, but it will be segueing now into the Green New Deal and sustainability, but that it doesn't diminish our actual authentic need to be in communion with one another and the natural world. And the mutuality, the mutual responsibility. And so for me, part of the framing, and again, I really respect the work that Nikki has done, that Patrick Wood has done, that Rosa Corey, these various individuals around focusing on the Agenda 21 and how that presents within municipal planning, regional planning, globalist policy implementation, really, really good. Where I differed with them somewhat is that their lens seemed to be very much framed around the structure of the United States, particularly, even though we know that ultimately this is a metaverse global program, but that it was impinging on our the essence of who we are as the United States, as an independent a nation that embodies this independence. And because of my life experience has been more looking with clarity at some of the origins of the country property rights, dispossession of indigenous people, and this larger narrative arc. And the fact that many of the technological systems that are being used to implement these goals are homegrown, and the policies, both the tools, the technologies, and the policies of neoliberalism, that for me, it complicates. It's a complicating factor in a more nationalist patriot frame for me. Anyway, so when I look towards reciprocity, it's both the natural world and then, not exclusively, but an indigenous worldview, understanding the positionality of humans as one of many siblings in webs of relationship, to me is an interesting frame, the frame of reciprocity, which could be how people work within natural systems in ways that are not harmful and degrading and extractivist. And not saying in any way that it's easy after decades of global supply chains to untangle from that, but that situating ourselves within a story of mutual responsibility, that it's none of us are doing this work because we were just doing it for ourselves. I mean, if you're an activist in this space and you're trying to tell the story, it's because you feel responsible to that which is beyond you. If you are really solely focused on yourself, you wouldn't put yourself out there. You just take care of business, right? You wouldn't have put this into it. So we are responsible for the community that we exist in now, and then also the people that will be coming behind. So anyway, that was sort of my framing tweet. One of the reasons that I didn't want to put off having this conversation, although, I know it's touchy and it's sensitive. I wish we had done this a bit ago, but maybe this is just the right time, is that the train is going to be leaving this. It has left the station, is going to be full steam ahead. And the weaponization of the collective outlook. And I'm not talking about this is the socialists coming in or the communists coming in, like, Glenn Wild is homegrown Seattle, right? Like, these are not outsiders. These are people that have been nurtured from within our existing geopolitical systems. For the data economy, for the bio-data economy, they're going to advance things like these soul-bound tokens. This is radical exchange, which is backed by a lot of the impact investing. And they're working on blockchain, public goods and collectivist goods. And they're saying that this Web 3.0, which, I understand as the CIA's mixed reality video game, that somehow we're going to fix all of these problems. And by moving into creating digital transactions of all of our social relationships with respect to property, with respect to the environment, with respect to skills, that we will have data dignity, and that this is central. And so as we understand what's moving forward in community, these systems, these technologies want to make our relationships visible to the machine, and they want to tokenize them and create data streams from them and profit from them. And so I think as we understand this, where Agenda 21 is going next with Web 3.0, we need to understand that, and understand that the idea of community in and of itself is about to be, further weaponized against individuals, but not that we should turn our back on the idea of interdependency. So Omidyar Network is a funder of Radical Exchange. And so I was just looking for an image today. And actually this conference, Jason, was in Denver last year. So the Radical Exchange.
Darn it. I
know you missed. I don't know if it was in person or it was just like, I don't know how it can be in Denver. If webinars, but it said it was in Denver. And so the gentleman from Omidyar Network India, he was hosting this panel discussion, but it included Paul Romer. So Paul Romer was the former chief economist for the World Bank, and he has a long ties to NYU and the Charter Cities movement. And I don't know if you remember, Jason, but when we were at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, there was a gentleman that was representing Charter Cities, actually from Canada, who was there and speaking. So, for me, when we're looking at Agenda 21 and that particular framing, like, it needs to be advanced into this new Web 3.0 reality of the economic system, which is, again, threading the needle, threading the, communism, socialism, capitalism into the stakeholder capitalist circular economy. But it's integral to how our society has worked. I don't think that we have been infiltrated. I think it's been here all along.
Right. And this whole thing is multi-layered, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. But one of the things that everyone, and I myself as well, jumped onto, which the World Economic Forum came out with that video, and it says you will own nothing and you will be happy. And everybody was like, oh my God, they're getting rid of private property. And if you actually start to study what it is they have planned here, they're not getting rid of private property. They're going to take a lot of our property, and we're going to be renters and we're going to be subscribers, and it's going to be largely service-based economy. But they're not eliminating property, and that's one of my challenges that I have with people that are on like the more conservative or libertarian side of it. Is they're looking at the legal fiction of property as the thing that gives them rights. And I'm saying that actually, if theory aside, looking at the real world, private property is used in mass in order to exclude people, take away people's rights. When they kick you, when the social media platforms kick you off and say you can't speak, it's actually property rights that's the foundation of that. And so when someone's kicked out of their home that they've already paid for several times over with the bank and interest, it's property rights. So I just came to this realization that like actually property rights is actually a weapon. And yet people think of it as being the source of their liberation. Now, obviously, I want everyone to own their own, to have a home and to have, even exclusive rights to have a space. And if you have a business, obviously I want you to I think there needs to be something that protects that. But just in the reality, that's not what's actually happening. That the very thing that people are pointing to for their and trying to defend for their liberation is actually the thing that's taking away people's liberty. So there's the irony there. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about individuals possessing a home and having exclusive rights to it or a business. I'm talking about the majority of property in this world is actually concentrated. Property ownership is concentrated in the hands of a few people and corporations and banks and religious institutions, these entities, and a handful of individuals, and it gives them an enormous amount of power. And that power is exercised through property law. And so it needs to be, we need to rethink this thing. And by the way, I don't consider people holding a mortgage as being homeowners. The bank, unless you hold your title, you don't own your home. And those are my views anyhow, not necessarily those of Alison or Cliff. I just wanted to insert that last little segment in there because I wanted to elaborate a little bit on my comments about property, which actually need more elaboration. But anyways, I get to do that because I'm the one editing this. So.
Well, and I would also say if the imperative of understanding the blockchain technology to what is coming is that it is both collectivist, like they're using it as, common property, common voting, but the technology is being sold as individual rights and libertarianism. And so in one of the conversations you and I and Lynn had, a week or so ago about Texas blockchain is interrogating, they really want to get this beachhead of California and Texas onto the blockchain, because for the data economy, that's a huge win, right? If you can blockchain the top two most populous states in the nation, and one of the most populous nations in the world, that's a huge amount of profit that you've got in it. But they've got to sell it differently, because the California ethos, even though a lot of Californians are moving to Texas, is different than the Texas ethos. So in California, you sell like the open air prison as something that's going to take care of you and offer you services and, green universal jobs and, UBI and all this stuff. And then in Texas, you go down and you sell the same technology as liberation and independence and financial, security. And so, but it's the same technology. It's the same technology. And so having the individual right, collectivist right conversation outside of understanding the new system of domination, I find isn't as productive as it could be until we incorporate what they've actually got planned.
Yeah. And that's also why the understanding what social impact finance is so important, because that's property. Those are, you're owning shares, stakes or whatever in this system. So you still have a layer within this supposed collectivist thing that's not collectivist. It's like a lot of this are just stories and narratives to sell you this thing. And so to me, like the way I've been able to navigate this with my whole life is just looking at power, how power is used and who has it, who doesn't have it, and if leaving aside all of the different framings and narratives, if you just focus on like, okay, how does this give me or take away power? I think it's a much easier way to approach some of these issues.
Okay, so I have a few images coming up, and this is just again to illustrate the collectivist. In 2019, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did a short animated film, or she was the voiceover, that was essentially laying out the Green New Deal. And it was done in cooperation with The Intercept, and it was done in cooperation with Naomi Klein's husband, who's a filmmaker, Canadian filmmaker. And Avi so Lewis. It was Avi Lewis, yes. Very beautifully done watercolors to sort of tell the tale of the story of the new future that is planned, right? And so we have to understand that this is information warfare that we're navigating. And a lot of it is about who has the better story, who can tell the better story. And they knew this. So you can see the date on this early film is 2019. So this is pre-lockdowns, right? But they had part one, which is the pre-lockdowns. And then they have a part two later, which is like October of 2020, where they're like, well, we're going to repair it all, which is totally the Hegelian dialectic you've got there, right? You imagine a future, you wreck the thing that you've got, and then you're going to rebuild it, the build back better version. So these are images from the second film that was done in October of 2020. Same artist, also with Avi Lewis. And you can see clearly the impressions that are being made around the people's collective, the repair collective, right? They're imprinting the words on there around the collectivist. And you can see the technologies that are being embedded in this Green New Deal, right? You've got the wind power, you've got solar, you've got satellite dishes, you've got people planting trees, but everything, those hands on the device are counting it, right? And that's the social impact element, that if you are not clued in, if you are not attuned to that, these bets will be being placed on the data analytics of not just the natural world and the energy systems, which again is so central to the technocracy and what Patrick Wood speaks of, but is also probably tracking the human capital of those people planting the trees, tracking their social relationships to the environment and to these smart built environments. And but I would say the average person, when they see that tablet or the tapping with the digital device, doesn't understand the games that are being played. And I think advancing within the digital identity blockchain space, you will have the chance to own a share, right? You will be offered a collectivist opportunity to have your individual ownership in the collective through these blockchain systems. And yet it doesn't do anything to dismantle the existing power structure. It is only creating this new bioeconomy data stream under the guise and premise of, sustainability and equity and justice.
Yeah. Well, and even like so collective is a word that I've always kind of like been sympathetic towards that idea, But my concept of it would be a bunch of individuals with free will coming together and agreeing to work collectively on something, not the United Nations or the World Economic Forum or your national, state, or local government managing it and telling you what to do. And, to me, it's like these are two totally different things. So to me, the idea of a collective in an organic sense is actually a great thing, but not in the sense that they're using it, not how again, it's a marketing thing. They're not interested in a collective of people that actually have a real say in a real say in how it's built and constructed. They have very specific and rigid protocols and rules that you have to go by, and you're entering into a collective where you don't actually, honestly, don't really have any power or say in anything. There are rules that you're submitting yourself to that you may not agree with.
Exactly, yeah. And we've often mentioned Stephen Newcomb's book, and this is just a short clip. Leo is doing some research into work in biodiversity documentation. Because again, as we know, the goal is full spectrum dominance, right? They want to dominate it down to the smallest microbe all the way up to the stars. They're going for all of these things. So, and ironically, this is in the Netherlands. So it definitely has sort of a Dutch East India Company, part whatever, 8, 10, what phase are we in of the Dutch East India Company in this? And it was a conference called Arise, and they were looking at, I think, documenting biodiversity, particularly with a focus on fungal networks, which is quite fascinating. And in this is a gentleman who's with the University of Twente, which is the esteemed technology university in the Netherlands. And he's talking about creating these data streams for the bioeconomy. And they use the term domain is repeated multiple times. And, my work is really informed by Stephen Newcomb's sort of view around domination and deconstructing the word dome and the control system. Like, again, Cliff, what you were saying about, you need to stand on this spot of belief so we can put our dome over you, right? If you get outside the dome, you're persona non grata.
And you already feel that it's not about ecologists having fun in the field, it's really about data and working together and making sense of data. And that's why University of Twente is on board.
Thank you, Goes. Now, first of all, I think it's a kind of personal motivation. Biodiversity is important, so maybe put that first. Second is, as a University of Technology, Twente is a University of Technology, we want to make impact. And if we want to make impact, you somehow have to connect the technology you're developing with a certain domain. That's important because you think, we're good in building digital infrastructure, we're good in AI, we're good in monitoring, but only if you have the real impact if you connect it to a domain. On the other hand, also by connecting it to domain, you also get inspiration for your own research. You have to improve your systems, you have to change it. So it's a kind of two-way process. And in this way, we think we really can contribute with our technology to biodiversity.
So again, just like for me in that short 1-minute clip, it laid things out very clearly. And I would say, Cliff, what you were saying in terms of the work that Nikki had done, sort of laying this broad foundation, right? Like doing this very in-depth research about what public health protocols, public planning protocols looked like in terms of managing neighborhoods, managing people's homes, depriving people of their rights. That same structure, when I look at that clip, I see the systems and the networks that were put in place applied to people and communities now scaled to the entire ecosystems, right? And so that I think is really interesting, is if you can take these bases of knowledge that are used in one space and say, okay, so what does that look like when you've got the next gen Dutch East India Company technology sector saying, like, now these systems of domination that we've refined in networks and neighborhoods, like we can do it to the natural world, right? We can do it to the fungal world. For me, I find that very interesting and helpful. So,
yeah. For me, this is the value in your framing, in your inquiry, in your view, in this careful study of systems of domination up through the mission system, through slavery, For you to be able to show us how these refined systems are now being broadened from communities to a global program, how they're being stretched out, I'm not able to find that conversation anywhere else, right? And so I think that, in the last 1 minute, what you spoke to offers a kind of an opening that has value, no matter where you're sitting in your view, to be able to, in my view, is not nearly as informed, but there's a kind of an expansion that takes place when you offer to show how these early systems are being refined and then being used, being stretched out past small communities to a global program. Whatever it is about that, I find it really helpful because it doesn't complexify it for me, it simplifies it. It's the same old racket, right? Just with more power, more technology. And so for me, in my area of interest, it's like just looking carefully at what that hammer actually is. Not the story that's being told about it, not the way it's being dressed up for this community to accept it or that community, but what is that hammer that's being used to dominate natural life, regardless of the story that they tell about it. Because if we can look at what it really is, we can say, is that relationship valid? Does it appear anywhere else in biological life or in nature? It doesn't. It only appears in mind. The only place you can trace this concept of domination to is in mind. It is activated in the world, and we look and we see slavery here. But it's an idea at its core. And you help me get closer to the recognition of the core idea. And so then I say to myself, following John Trudell, where does that idea arise in mind? In my listening, where is it that I hear, what is the source of that idea in mind that an individual like me might take on, refine, and use to dominate the world, right? And to be able to question, is that something I want to listen to? Before I just get on board and start manifesting it in the world, to take a moment and to say to myself, does that feel safe for the little things in life? Does it take care of the birds and the bees and the thing? It just, not like, but like the tone of it makes me feel unsafe. That you're just going to smash and demand. And, I've got all these tender things. I don't want anybody stomping around in the garden. So it's not even that I need to confront it or something. I'm just evaluating, is that kind? Is it something I want to bring from mind through my action into the world? And they're trying to sell this. They're trying to sell global domination as a kindness. It's like, it's not. And in your work helps me get closer to being able to see that. So I really appreciate it.
One of the things that Nikki wrote about was these community development organizations, and I encountered these with my work with Sherry Honkala of Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, and you would see these in these cities, these community development organizations, and what I discovered is these are not actually communitarian or organizations that are actually genuinely working for community. They were actually working on behest of private, typically like my brain just stopped. Developers, they're actually working for private developers. So when they say public-private partnership or community development, it's the community and the public piece is just for show. It's not. These are actually systems for private property and also domination and control over the public and community. So I just there's another challenge there in order to actually see what's happening. And move past the rhetoric,
Jason, what I like about what you said, sorry.
Go ahead.
Forgive me, Alison, is what you're pointing to is this element of deception, right? So here I am in a conversation, and what I have to overcome or teach myself to overcome, otherwise I'll be put on a pathway without knowing what's happening, is this element of outright deception. And so that is one of our challenges. To be in the presence of storytelling that's actually purposefully deceptive. Hiding the actual intent, coloring the intent, in order to sell it. So I feel like as an adult in this moment in life, we have to bring our awareness level up and just not accept like believe, but just notice that part of what we have to tread through is a purposeful deception. Yeah, so I appreciate it, Jason.
Thanks. Alison, you were going to say?
I just wanted to add to just building on the private property. Again, I don't have the answer to this. I don't know exactly how to resolve it, but the largest private property owned, one of the private home rental properties is Blackstone, right? And they scooped up all of those homes after the last economic crash. And we know that those things.
When they're still doing it, I mean, they're still not just BlackRock, but yeah, they're scooping up properties Blackstone, in mass. Yeah.
So, and even those of us who are in positions of having homes, most people have mortgages. There's very few people who outright have paid off their house and now and so as we understand the social credit scoring stuff, which again, I keep emphasizing came out of Stanford, FICO, with blockchain, with Internet of Everything, real-time data analytics, the idea of secure, to have a mortgage, you have to have insurance. And so there are many ways that they can play this game to game you out of your private property. So, it's very conditional. There are very few people who can stand on their own thing and say, no, you can't, because they have all of these, they've built it. And I think part of the reconciliation for me is understanding that we're sort of in the belly of the beast. The United States, I think Sherry Honkala always talked about that, when she would go, abroad, and she would say, no, we're actually the poor, the unhoused in the United States, we are in the middle of it. And yet people can't see because of the story they're occupying. And, I spent the last couple of weeks tracking, secret U.S. experiments on domestic civilian populations in the United States to do radiological, really terrible things. And we don't necessarily we want to feel safe. Nobody wants to wake up in the morning and realize that they're in the belly of the beast. So we tell ourselves the stories that we're not. Those of us who have the stability and comfort to feel we've staked out a space for the moment that we're not. Many people don't even have that. So, anyway, it's just the complexity of the story and the narrative is that part of what we're coming to terms with after all of the unsettlement is what are we? What are we in, right? And then how do we navigate through to a better place? And we need to do that collectively, in my opinion.
Yeah. Interesting side note on the Sherry Honkala thing is she was trying to get the poor people's, it might have been Kensington Welfare Rights Union, which then kind of turned into the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. But she was trying to get more of that involvement in the World Social Forum, and now leaving aside the problems with the World Social Forum because clearly that's a controlled space. But it was funny, the activists, the anti-poverty activists around the world didn't really want them to have much of a role in that initially because they didn't really believe that there was actual poverty in America, because their vision of America was everybody's rich, and even here people think well, nobody's really poor because if you have a TV, you're not. If you have TV and cable, and if you have a cell phone, you're not poor, which is not actually understanding the reality of the situation. But it was just interesting, just the perception of the United States around the world and that's how this system has been sold to people all around the world based on all the progress here, and a lot of people don't actually understand that there is extreme poverty here in the United States, even now. So just kind of it's just something I thought of while you were talking about that.
Yeah. I mean, and I think Nikki herself struggled in that space too. So, I'm not saying that she wasn't aware of all of that, but how do we get to a better place? And
I think part of it is a willingness for people that bring their awareness up enough to notice we are in the belly of the beast, right? We're being digested by the monster, right? So that's not a story that most adults feel comfortable with, like, because I'm not saying not because they're capable, but because they've been trained to live in a different view of themselves, the right view of themselves. We're strong. We're America. We're proud, right? All of this propaganda to hold yourself as a rugged, capable American, bootstraps and all that stuff. So there's been a cultural shaping of people's view of themselves, which says that I'm going to be in the NBA, I'm going to be a football player, a doctor, a lawyer, just shaping us toward a celebrity, this idea of exceptional, proud, and we buy into the narrative that's being offered. But to wake up a little bit is to recognize that you've been eaten by a monster. You're now in its belly being digested. That's actually more in reality than it is to be like, okay, well, but this is not for children, right? So I don't have to worry. And I'm just putting it out there. It might be more useful than pretending you're a rock star or going to be a rock star, that you're going to play in the NBA, that you're going to make $1 million. It might be more useful to wake up to that you are poor. This is what poverty looks like, even though you have a television, which is actually just a way to enforce what it is that you think about. It's not a luxury. Television is not a luxury. The luxuries that we have are used to dominate and control us. I would prefer that people wake up to how rotten this whole thing is so that we can actually get started. Like, it's not about like, well, it's good, but let's make it better. It's not good on any level. It's not good. It is not. Historically, it arose you could speak to it better than I could, in systems of domination. They have been refined all the way to this moment, and all the way on the road of refining systems of domination, they've been trying to teach, I can only speak for the U.S. public, that we're proud, we're exceptional, we're on the way, we're number one, we belong, we should control the conversation. That's all just social conditioning, when in fact, we are in the belly of empire, right? And have almost no control over their aims, their direction, their goals, but they have a massive apparatus to cause us to think about their activities in a way that we go along with it. So I would tell a child there's a monster in the world. I would tell a child, when we step outside, we're going to find beauty. Come, I'll show you, in this blade of grass and in this flower. And there are things that go bump in the night. There are predatory energies in the world, right? And let's get you ready for it. You don't have to be afraid. I'm going to be here with you. But if you're not able to see them, you'll walk right into a crack den. You'll walk into a narcissistic relationship. You'll walk into a university that doesn't intend to teach you, but intends to indoctrinate you. John Fidel often spoke about that, that the systems of education are actually systems of indoctrination into empire. So I would tell a child there are things that are not well in the world, that are unkind. I would teach an adult or a child to recognize, beyond the story a thing tells, beyond its shaping, is it kind to life itself, not just to me? Can I learn to have a compass, an internal compass, that I can carry to read as in a fungal flow, moving through a system, that I can read, is this a good path? Is this a kind path? Am I welcome here? Or one that alerts me when I'm being dominated and manipulated. So I want to wake up more to the aspects that are belly of the beast, right? And develop my listening for that which is loving, actually kind. I think that we are in a poverty of awareness, a poverty of choices in awareness, right? And we're driven down into, is it right or is it wrong? Oh yeah, okay, now we vote. Oh, you're on that side. It is infantile, infantile in its narrowness, right? And leaves you with no choice except to defend yourself against others, whom, and to behave in ways, and encourages you to behave in ways that are essentially unkind, that are further dominating the people around you. So I think there's a poverty of awareness in your work. When you spread out the historical aspects of it, help me see it. And I was just noticing as you were talking, all these images, they all want to paint some bright, happy moment. It's like, come on, let's take a picture of the beast, And so Jason speaks to it a lot of times. He's saying, hey, spin it whatever you want. This is so anyway. I'm working on a children's book, which is kind of like how to deal with monsters, right? The monsters that are going to be there when you go outside the house in a way that empowers you, but not to pretend they're not there, not to pretend that we're some exceptional, thing and deserve all of this stuff. Yeah. So part of my friendship with you is just deeply appreciating your daylighting and awareness around the core concepts, the ideas themselves, because when I can see them clearly, I know how to orient to them, It's not about my believing them, but when I can get a good sense of I feel like you're just trying to show people what's really going on, not to tell them what to believe, but you've said to me before, I think that if people knew what was happening, they wouldn't like it. They just wouldn't like it. They probably wouldn't take and drop their kid off at that school, And anyway, so I think your conversation is helpful in the broad community, in that level of tenderness. No, hold on to your kid's hand in this moment, right? That's helpful. Don't let go and let them participate in you had that little playground scene with the drones and stuff. It's actually hang on, don't let go of their hand. This isn't kind. Don't put them back in the car, go somewhere on the playground, right? Anyway, so I appreciate you so much. And Jason, thank you for letting me be part of the conversation. I don't have much in the way of technological sophistication to add to anything, but I think that the work you guys are doing together, the conversations you're having, make available ways of being in the world, begin to perceive the world in ways that we can start to make some choices about what's healthy and kind and loving. I don't hear from you that you're just trying to be right about this or that. I hear you kind of mapping things so that other adults and children can kind of make some choices, some informed choices, So I appreciate both your work in that way.
Well, thank you.
A few things that popped into my head while you were talking there was, first of all, with the TVs and the phones, I heard it once said that if we didn't buy them, they would give them to us for free. And I think that's true. And we have that. We have the Obama phone. They're like, here, you can't afford a smartphone because a lot of poor people have flip phones, and they're like, that's a problem. We need the track and trace thing. We'll give you the phone. Here's a free phone. Regarding the monster thing, there are monsters out there, but the challenge is actually talking about the monster without embodying the monster. In other words, to me, even if someone's promoting something really terrible, to me, I don't view it as this human being is the monster. I view it as this human being is carrying water for the monster, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? The exorcism, the mythology. I mean, some people believe it's true or whatever, but the idea of demon possession as maybe just even as just a metaphor is really useful to me, because I've seen in others, and even at moments in myself, this monster come out. And you're like, whoa, that's not me. That's not what I'm about. And you have to pull back. And, sometimes, so to me, it's more useful to approach that as viewing it more of there's this energy that's being expressed through this human being. But I'm not interested in attacking the human being. It's really that energy that's being expressed that I'm really against. And they had a remake. I'm a big horror movie fan, but there's old movies called The Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2, and there's a third one. But anyways, I won't get into it. But they're almost like comedy horrors. But if you don't like horror, you won't like them. But they made a remake of it, which was actually it was like a scary movie, and it was actually really brutal. But the idea behind it is really interesting, which is like there's these people that they love very dearly become possessed, and then the person that they love is attacking them, and then they're like defending themselves and actually doing harm to the person that they love, and then the demon would let the person that they loved come out every once in a while, and they're like, please don't do this to me, why are you doing this to me? And then they would be like, oh, I'm sorry, and then the demon would come back out. I mean, it's a brutal, don't watch it if you don't like horror movies, because it's kind of brutal. But that idea is interesting to me, which is, like it's these energies that are the problem, so we don't want to attack necessarily the person, but maybe the idea and the expression, if that makes sense. And then two other things real quick. And then the other narrative too is like, we're in the belly of the beast. America is the belly of the beast. I don't quite view it that way. I think it's actually more broad than that. And I don't exactly know what the parameters are, but clearly like America, the United Kingdom, Israel, France, Belgium, I mean, all these nation states, as well as corporations and banks, are the beast. So like a lot of people on the left like to frame it as, oh, it's just America. And then they'll celebrate these other countries, maybe that are socialist, even socialist countries. Oh, because they have more benefits for their citizens, yet they're still part of the beast. They're still part of it. So like, I even like kind of, I'm not like a nationalist, and I'm not like go America, but I'm also not like, oh, it's just America, so like that framing of it is also challenging. And again, I don't know what the parameters. And then last thing I was going to say was Alice and I and others actually are going to do a show coming up about homeschooling. So you mentioned the homeschooling thing. So yeah, stay tuned. We've got a really great show coming up talking about that. So those were the things that popped into my head while you were talking, Cliff. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Jason. So I too, like you, I don't want to like take a hammer to the individual who's expressing an idea that is, like harsh and dominating, because it's the idea, right, being expressed through them, right? So when I look to say something monstrous, I don't mean the person across from me, even if they're caught up in expressing a monstrous idea. That's why, like what I like about Alison's work is we're getting closer and closer to the core ideas that are then onboarded in life and carried into our social systems. But it arises first in mind. I mean, you can't get from this chair out the door without first engaging mind, right? So mind is this background sphere, and it's a community space. Like, it's not like you don't have a private mind. I'm just saying, in my view, the where we are in community, like I may have some stars in my body, some microfungal elements, some this and that. I might even have little tiny pieces of you, but but pretty much it's kind of my platform, my place, right? I say that even though there's like a lot of different elements, but this is kind of the me that I think about. But in mind, this is the true community space. And so ideas have power, right? And so when somebody's listening to ideas in mind, dominating, harsh, John Trudell, predator level energies in mind, and then bringing it into the biological world, right? I'm saying that the monster is not the person who's putting it at play in the world. There's somebody who listened and accepted the idea and then is operating behind it. But it's the idea itself that is poisonous, that is toxic. I would wash them clean of it if I could. And, and sometimes I can. I would just pour something gently over them to disrupt the signal. And then they're not hearing that thing in mind. And then they do the thing, like all of a sudden they're here again. The demon's not talking, right? They're like, oh, hey, what are you doing? It's me. I'm here. Right? We can disrupt that signal, whatever it is, whatever you want to call that thing. But it's an idea in mind, and we know we can disrupt it because it's not at play all the time in everyone. It's on occasion in, certain people are running with it. It's not everyone. So just to be able to see that there's a kind of a predatory energy in mind, and that's the idea that we want to disagree with, and not harm and kill and imprison people. We want to tell stories such that we dissuade people from listening to that story and maybe choose to take on a different story. So stop being informed by that in mind and look maybe to be informed by something else, something a little more life related, a little kinder, a little more loving, because this piece is not. So I don't have bad people. I have people who listen to dark ideas and express them and get behind them and are patriotic about them. And, and for me, it's like, whether it's a dandelion or, a garden hose, like, how do we wash them a little bit so that their system of listening is disrupted and their attachment to these ideas are disrupted? For me, in community, like, I have a little bit of purpose. I pay attention to what the people around me are listening to. And because I care about them, I get involved in disrupting the signal a little bit in places where what I see is that it's hurtful to them.
So if you take like a drink and you like throw it in someone's face, is that like a baptism or of some sort?
So a disruption would be in action or in words, something that lets them unhook a little bit from this kind of addicted to listening to this channel. You know what I mean? So something that draws their attention away a little bit from their stance, I believe this, and around a certain idea. And so how can I be kind in conversation so that somebody has an opportunity to let go of their stance and not hold on to it so tightly, so that they become just a little bit more open, right? And then offer a dandelion or a story or a framing that might feel attractive to them, to help them step away from what it is they're holding on to. I'm saying they're not being dominated by this thing in mind. They're holding on to it. I'm saying that the monster doesn't have them. They have the monster's hand in theirs. It's a very, it takes a little thought to think about it. So I'm not saying the problem is the monster. I'm saying the problem is there are monstrous ideas in mind. And when we take them in our hands and call them our own, then we behave in these ways. So I want to have a slow story with somebody, a kind story with somebody, to say, hey, maybe take a look at what you're holding on to, right? And in such a way that they can notice it and say, here's another possibility. You might hold hands with me, right? And I'll be your friend in these ways. I'll be helpful and kind in these ways, and then follow through and be a friend and be helpful and kind. Some way to kind of like, but people are responsible for what they're listening to. And there's no monster, if this is just my view, there is no monster in mind that can truly dominate life. That's just a story we've been told. It's that we have to give permission in our listening somehow. We have to make room for and accept and take on somehow. And in that place where people have that power to listen and take on and accept, I think Alison and yourself and others are telling a different story. Let's just take a look. Because I think the power is really with individuals, right? Not with, as much as these things are terrible, dominating things, I'm saying from my view, just sharing it with a couple of friends today and whoever's listening, it may be that these things in mind have no power over us except for the permissions that we give to them. If that's the case, we remain dignified, and maybe we just made some mistakes giving permission to things that, once you let them in the door, they're kind of nasty. They tend to dominate you. That's what they are. They're dominating things. They do, they're like, oh. So, anyway, thanks for letting me ramble a little bit. I mean, this is part of the conversation, but then, for anybody who's watching, this is what I try to give to my friends. I try to give to my friends, the belly of the beast, but it's okay, right? We have this life that can't be smashed, that can't be taken from us. This is my offer in friendship. These are my small stories to say, we don't have to spend our time figuring out how to, fight the beast or run from the beast. We can actually just start to tap into the creative power of life that exists within us. Let go a little bit of this story. This is me in friendship. Yeah.
So I sort of feel like, Jason, where you were saying, in the horror movie that people kept like switch out. And like what you're listening to and the invitation, Cliff, is that this document here, it says portals to beautiful futures. an invitation from the Omidyar network and the like guild of future architects, right? And so sometimes like the monster may not look like, it may like look like a dude with a really nice car who wants to take you out to expensive dinner, like they're creating this invitation that's like, and it's quite interesting because they call it a portal, and this is where I think it would be interesting to take the Agenda 21 technocracy communitarian analysis and like leverage it up into the metaverse and then build in this idea of the doctrine of domination, right? Like the broader expanse that's like in a comprehensive way. The control mechanism is to invite you through the portal, and it's a rainbow portal. And I'm increasingly, the more recent research I've been doing with Steffers and Jen and things around optics and spectrum and wave and light frequency. Because some of these communications, some of them, like when you talk about listening, it's the communications are happening through sound waves or light waves. And in this new version that they're trying to roll out of the Internet of Everything, it's going to be optics and light. And so they've got sort of this integrated portal to this sort of two-dimensional painted universe sort of through there. And this is Pierre Omidyar. And again, within the context of the images we saw earlier of those films, the Ocasio-Cortez film, and then the follow-up Repair the World film that Avi Lewis was a part of, he did those with The Intercept. And The Intercept is wholly owned by Pierre Omidyar, right? So they're painting this story and offering you an invitation, but it's a deceptive invitation because they're not telling you on the other end of the portal is the two-dimensional metaverse CIA video game, but they're just going to make it look really welcoming. And so I wanted to make that connection between the story, the imaging, the invitation, and the deception. So I included this. This is from this Portals to the Future. So they're offering this invitation, and I feel like they have a number of sort of foresight scenarios. So they're seeding this future with the films and the watercolors and the stories. And again, this is that they're going to accomplish this new, more just future through these new policy implementations, which are very much in alignment with what Nikki wrote about, with these broader things. And in this, it's an elderly woman, and she's like, I never imagined that the world would get any different, but finally now we have this collective well-being exchange. And the collective well-being exchange is going to provide me better housing, and we're going to have an opportunity. They ask us to like co-create our housing and redesign it, and literally they bring in stuff about the church and how it's called the promise. I mean, it's quite overboard, right? And this is Pierre Omidyar. This is the guy who literally is about good identity, about educational technology, about truth policing, all of these things, right? And thank goodness, and it's very overplayed, right? They're like, thank God for the Black Lives Matter folks with an X, demanding that these problems be made right. And so they've got this very progressive lens on it, and though it actually is incredibly regressive. The challenge is, and this is how they use the dialectic, is they pick progressive faces, right? They groom these progressive faces, Naomi Klein, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, these people to front this, they throw out Black Lives Matter, right? They create this polarity. Oh, it's the leftists that are doing this, right? But in the background, it's the Peter Thiels, the Pierre Omidyars, this crypto anarcho-capitalist libertarians who are going to be doing social prescribing and tokenizing human lives as assets. And yeah, sure, now you've traded redlining people out of, have homes into putting their children on blockchain as a data asset, right? So it's a false choice, but they're very clever in the way these people have the top behavioral scientists, to do this work, to lay it out for them. And, I find that even people who imagine themselves to be informed and educated, they're not understanding the psychological warfare. Like, they don't engage in online content with while saying, okay, what is the power dynamic? Where's this information coming from? What are they trying to sell me? Doing your internal listening, Cliff, like, does this feel right? Like, what do I know about historically where this fits into my larger framework? And to me, it's quite fascinating that the design motif that they use there is a guitar, right? So they've got this, and there's nothing about a guitar in the story. So like there's a visual impression of conveying, like through a resonance, this message that incorporates, justice and religion and making things better, and this promise that is actually and perhaps the fact that like the sky or the sun is green up there, is another signifier on this. But they're holding your hand and walking you through the portal. But you should have like listened to your gut before you took that person's hand, because the portal is not going to where you think it's going.
Yeah, Marshall McLuhan. The medium is the message. You remember that adage, and it's like the portal is the message. The portal is a thing in and of itself, and that's these people think that they're going to use this space as a tool. It's just a tool we're going to use, and it's like, no, you are the tool.
Yeah, you're the tool. Well, and the thing is that, to me, if we could take the globalization to the next level of understanding as a technological system of domination, that is the metaverse, right? Because I don't see, while there's a lot of conversation around the World Economic Forum and things being linked into Agenda 21, I just don't feel like people are understanding the global imperative is because the next phase of this planned human evolution in the global brain is that we live in the metaverse. And that's they can only dominate us if we go through the portal and live in the place where they're in control of all the messaging, and we forsake our own identities and live on the other side of the portal.
So in my own life, what I encourage in people is a kind of listening so that they don't get completely mesmerized by the high quality behavioral science of the message, right? And just listen past it a little bit. Like, is this really honoring me? Like if we could develop a sense, like these, to use the body as an example, these little tiny microbial fungal networks, I don't think that they're getting systems to flow a certain way by deceiving them. I think that they're, as elements of natural life, they're somehow honoring the plant's desire to grow and bloom and flourish, right? And that life itself is being moved by other life that it feels is actually honoring its purpose, right? That like so if I could help people develop their listening such that they look past the bright, shiny offer with all of its little elements and to a kind of an asking, does this really honor life? And that's not just my life, right? Like notice when they're trying to make it all about me. Like, pay attention. They're saying, I'm going to have more money in the bank. I'm going to have a better day. So, and we buy in sometimes because it looks like I'm going to win in this. But is life going to win? Is life like including so neonicotinoids and bees? Is life winning? Well, but they're like saying, oh, you won't have weeds, Cliff. And I'm like, yeah, but my me is bigger. My me is community. Like my listening is in the larger life, right? I'm not a spokesperson for it. I'm a member, full-fledged. And when you approach me with a way to get rid of weeds that damages my buddies for whom I just planted an amazing, pollinator garden, that, like you're not really honoring me because I'm making room for life in these ways. And you're saying, like, no, take yourself out of that and imagine what we can do for you individually. So like kind of shearing me off into a kind of a little tiny point in convincing me. So, listening for, is it honoring life, not just my life, but how about the lives of people I don't disagree with? How about the lives of people that I don't know? How about life, just life? Does this honor life, right? Not my little piece of it, not just me and my friends, not does it satisfy, like in line with my view. But, and maybe in order to get people to be able to hear whether or not an offer is honoring life, they need to start extending their community a little bit, right? It's a conversation about community. Let's talk. It's like, let's talk a little bit about having your sense of community be more inclusive, not just those that are in agreement with your psychological view, not just those that are in agreement with your monetary view, but life bigger than, your cliques and where you earn your money and what lets you keep your house. Let's include a little bit more. And I think a child, a 6-year-old, can make that determination. Does this honor life? So of course, I think adults can come to it as well. But we've been at the mercy of, this like shaping for so long, that it's kind of like talking to people, you can really get beat up, But so asking adults to be a little more childlike. I said in a video the other day, just go outside and sit still and watch a bug for no reason. That's what kids do, right? They just watch it like, oh my God, I saw a bug. Right? To get a little bit more in touch with the mystery and the complexity and the miracle that life is. Whether the children are closer to it because they've been shaped less often in their lives. Not that they're not being pushed around by Disney and the rest of them, but it hasn't really taken hold yet. And so I think that for children, it's helping and assisting them in this inquiry. Does this honor my family? Does this honor my friends? Does this honor life? Like this little bug, you're not going to hurt this little bug because he's my buddy, right? And adults it's a little bit more complex because their idea of who they are is kind of more rigid, and so I'm honoring Nikki Rapana in her passing, honoring her contribution, and my honoring is not just for people that I agree with or not agree. Because she was breathing, because she was alive, because she loved her grandchildren, because she walked in the forest, because she wanted a good outcome for us all, right? So all these places I can find to honor her, yeah. And and sorcerers, with their thing, like who knows what the guitar means? Like, I've been looking at it for 5 minutes, and I'm like, no, you're not getting in, whatever it is. Like I'm not buying it, I'm not playing. No.
Pick up that guitar. Yeah.
No.
And again, so this is an image. This is from their repair video, and it's one of these very artful. Look how handmade. How could this possibly be part of propaganda? It's handcrafted vision just for you, right? And part of the thing that's
what will you create?
What will you create, right? I live in a city. There are many aspects of things that are outlined in this Agenda 21 that on the surface feel really good, like bikeable, walkable cities, places, parks, green, affordable, accessible transit, like all of these things, right? This is the vision that they're selling. And so it's challenging when that has been woven in for so many decades, that when it turns out that actually this is all run by BlackRock and it's going to involve QR codes and wearable technologies, to say like, whoa. And then they want you to run the other way and go live in the cave. And I'm like, but I feel like my destiny is to try to stay in the city that I loved, which disappointed me horribly for several years. But I don't want this thing to banish me from the place that I chose, right? Like I would choose to try to stand the ground and try to tell the right story in this space, which is not to say that everyone needs to make my choice. I'm certainly but I don't want to cede this ground at this point. Maybe at some point it will change, but I didn't want to cede that point. And so to be able to tell this story rather than run from this vision and say, this is a terrible vision, I would say yeah, but we know the hand there is actually the hand of the hedge funds, and that there's traps hiding behind these things, it's sort of like if you put the ultraviolet light on that, and then all of the sensors are going to show up, and you're going to say I don't want that version. That's not the version that I actually want. I wouldn't mind a cool park with a lot of greenery and some dominoes. Like, I like a good game of dominoes. So, that was sort of the point of this slide is, oftentimes people tell me about blockchain, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, it's only a tool. So I don't know. But when I see this, like, I'm not prepared to simply give all of that concept up, because the present power dynamic means that it's going to come with a lot of unwanted baggage. I would rather shine the light and say the power dynamic that is building this is not building it for the true community. It is building it for the data economy. And therefore, we need to address the future of the data economy before, and put that to bed and say that is against life. The data economy, the biodata economy especially, is against life. And then once that's fully put to bed, we can go back to building the thing that we want the way we want it. But we shouldn't, we need to, it can't be done outside the power dynamic.
So I just want to say in agreement with you, there's this push to push us off the platform where we choose to stand, Philadelphia, biological life. They want to push us off the platform of biological life into the metaverse. And we're saying, let's have a conversation, because I don't want to see this ground. I think that there's a miraculous visual, like cues for elegant living. All I have to do is look to my own biology. And I see beauty and cooperation and miracles of community just within my physical body, right? And then from there, when I can see it there, I see it in the world. Symbiotic relationships, honoring relationships. And they're trying to draw a pretty picture to say, we'd like to take you completely off the platform of biological life into this thing that we've designed, which is going to be better for you. Oh, and this is probably what it'll look like. It won't look like you in a corner with a VR headset on. It'll look like you playing dominoes with your friends in the open air. They don't intend to give us, try to go find a park that's open right now where you could put a table and play dominoes. This is not the space they intend to create for us.
Yeah, when the COVID thing, the idea that they were closing parks, like, wait, you want us to socially distance, but you're closing we can't. I can't go camping. Like, that's the most socially distanced thing I can do, and because I can't by myself usually. But I mean, and so not to beat the property horse to death here, but the whole transitioning of like us into these spaces around off of like land. And I think about, like, again, Stephen Newcomb, we always keep bringing him up, but it's so important. His exploration began with him wanting to understand what the foundations of Indian law were, and particularly property. What are the foundations of this exclusion and this claim that this is ours and it's not yours, actually. Right? And so they put people into these reservations, and so this is an extension of that, because ultimately what the metaverse is property, but in like an extreme artificial way.
Right.
Anyway.
They've already got, like, can you imagine house flipping shows in the metaverse? But I do want to also mention too, like, I don't know if it's Puha or Pooja Olhaver, who is one of the co-authors of the Soul-Bound Tokens paper. But she had this tweet that she said, Web 2.0 is the PayPal mafia, but Web 3.0 is the public goods mafia, right? And so again, the propaganda and the positioning is that will be, you can be a co-owner in this space, but it is a tokenized co-ownership, and your relationship to it is tokenized. And then through the exchanges of these tokens, we can learn you for the machine learning and to create these data streams, right? But I do feel like that the public goods element of the blockchain conversation really needs to be, because they're posing it as a dichotomy, right? PayPal versus the public goods. But when I pointed out that Radical Exchange, which is advancing soul-bound tokens, and both Weil and Buterin, who are the other two co-authors of the paper, are on this board of only 8 board members, that it's funded by Omidyar Network. And I said, and Pierre Omidyar, has a 6% stake in PayPal. And I said, it actually isn't. It's all the same bucket of money sloshing around, because at this point, the wealth is so concentrated. This bucket of capital is held by just a very few hands. And so it's not actually a distinction. The distinction you're making isn't true. And I think she's not pleased with that, but.
And just to further complicate things, I'll just remind people that money is not wealth. It's a complete artificial fiction. And there are a class of people who have the power to create as much of it as they want through credit. And so like, I constantly push back against the narrative of they have this, that money is wealth, and it's just a matter of distribution of this wealth, because the whole thing is in many ways an arbitrary fiction. So, I mean, that's one of those foundational things that we have to like shift our thinking out of, because we're thinking of money as wealth. It's a total fiction. Like, I can't reiterate this enough. Money is a complete fiction, and it supposedly represents real things. Freedom tokens, and that's what money was initially like. That is it is. It's a token, but now it's changing. It's changing its shape. You know, it's. Cliff, did you?
Yeah. So what I would suggest is that community is wealth. That real community, the community that makes possible my life, that is my wealth. And it's not just some silly idea of me as a guy with this complex mixture of stardust and mushrooms and like this thing that I call me is my wealth. It's my place. It's my biological platform from which to view the world, to speak, to contribute. This community is my wealth. That community is wealth. I couldn't speak to money as a fiction, but I've listened to you and I get it. But this is not a fiction. The me that I am is community, and this is my wealth, right? And if I can land there, then I can accept all of the other odd-looking, different-looking people in the world than me, because I've got some really odd-looking, different-looking things inside me. If I can come home to this community gathering that I call myself is my wealth, then I can look from there out onto the world and recognize that a diversity of people, a diversity of views, a diversity of ideas, that I want to allow for all of that, because that level of community is my wealth.
And so, like, within the continuing the community conversation, this is Hope Lab. Pierre Omidyar's wife, Pam, founded Hope Lab. And essentially, it's a social innovation enterprise around mental health and physical health. And so this is going to be knitted into the wellness, behavioral analytics, impact investing space. And it's interesting, again, if you look at the rainbow as photonic communication of the light wave, like that their logo, which has been remade, is evoking the rainbow, which I think most people now have been conditioned to imagine that around pride, but I think it's actually what's embedded underneath the rainbow is light wave frequency communication related to photonics. And I think it's being imprinted with other things. And it's quite interesting because when I was originally doing my work around impact investing, the Global Impact Investment Network was funding B Lab, which was setting up these benefit corporations. And they needed metrics, common metrics, to run the game of impact investing, because no one would play the game unless the rules were laid out. And all of the bets on human behavior needed to sort of be established. And so, many impact funds were backing this, including Rockefeller. And the impact metrics they came up with were actually called IRIS, I-R-I-S. I can't remember what it stands for. It was like impact something, whatever. That was what they called it, Iris. And it turns out Iris is actually a goddess of like a Greek goddess, like a messenger goddess, not just Hermes, but it was the rainbow. So Iris is the rainbow messenger. So that is this photonic communication. And then it's also your eyes and your optic nerve in the window, like to your brain of the outside world in. So to me, that feels significant. And again, they're in community, and how often is that? But you've got an individual who's staring at the phone. So all the people are actually seem to be looking in the phone as opposed to each other. So it's hard. So that is the data economy now, is that our social relations are funneled through the device so that it can capture and then also mirror our emotions and our reality. Because ultimately, I feel like this is a machine that is trying to become human by capturing both for profit and machine learning, all of that which we are, which is our most intimate relationships, is what at this phase is what it's after. And so behavioral compliance to mental health protocols, to wellness protocols are going to be central. So it's not just Pierre over there doing his stuff with the portal and ed tech and identity. It's also Pam, who's on the other side doing health compliance, data analytics through devices.
Yeah, and through those devices, it's a mediation of our relationships, and it's a management and a manipulation. And so it's not, it's not this organic pure. It's peer to peer. They always talk about peer to peer, but it's not peer to peer. None of this is peer to peer. It's impossible to have a purely peer to peer relationship with this technology. It's a total myth. Delusion. It's not happening.
I will also point out people of color in this image, and I will sort of credit Sebs, who she's been doing a lot of work looking at melanin and the fact that molecularly that is an organic particle, nanoparticle, that is used to make bioelectronics compatible with human biology. And so there's a lot of layers there that needs further investigation. I think she is pursuing around acquiring the quality of melanin, the sourcing of that, how this fabricates into these bio-nanoelectronics, and then the targeting of these communities for impact investing, which largely run on trauma and this intergenerational trauma that's being calculated through ACEs scoring. So there is something both in the policy structures around impact investing, but also in the very specific realities, as you said, Cliff, you're a biological platform, right, of many different components. And in that way, Black and brown communities are profitable, potential profit commodities for their behavior, as well as actually for their biological structure, which is quite overwhelming. When I found that really all you need to look up is melanin and graphene and bioelectronics, and it's just and again, unless you know to look that up, how would it ever occur to anyone that that's something that you should look into? But I'm saying that's something that needs to be part of the conversation.
There's a lot of happening over here.
I'm full of that, right?
Can we lay off on the pause for a minute?
I don't have a lot of
I'm working on this.
No, I love
I've got a solution.
Yeah,
but what's your answer? What's your answer?
Dude, I love it.
I guess I'm packing all these things like a box of Kleenex.
Yeah. No, I love it. I just let them float. I'm like, okay, chicken out. It's great. I love tagging along with you on stuff like this. It's so much fun.
Now, I forgot to mention that early on in this stuff, I found there was a Pay for Success, the model for home visits, tagged to pregnant women on Medicaid in South Carolina. That was the program that they were targeting for early childhood intervention. And so this was prenatal, and Google was one of the backers of that, funders of that program. And it was, again, linking Medicaid in South Carolina. But one of the elements of that program was an app that came through Hope Lab called Goal Mama. And literally, you were supposed to engage with online content and respond on this app. Because really, poverty, the only thing between, a pregnant woman and, financial stability is just a solid app with real-time data analytics. And I remember, and this is me, I attended an event at Penn maybe in 2018 or 2019, where these people, neuroscientists and policymakers, and they were these are all these academics, PhDs, people running institutes. And I said, hey, this concerns me. I know about this program. It's linked in with all of these investors. I don't think you solve poverty with an app. And I can't tell you, there were like several women, and how do you know? Maybe you can solve poverty with an app. And again, these are people who are in such deep denial about the nature of what reality is, because they're pulling a 6-figure salary and going to the wine and cheese saying, well, sure, the only thing the only problem is that people just don't have good control. They don't have good self-management. It's this scientific eugenics type of stuff. And so anyway.
Well, there's that story of like, the indigenous people of the Americas, the ship was off the shore and they couldn't see the ship. At least that's the story, and I don't know how accurate that is. But as a story, that's an interesting idea that like there's this thing that's coming to invade them, but they couldn't actually see it because it didn't fit into their understanding of things. Now, again, I don't know if that's actually a true story or not, but as a metaphor, even. I that's kind of what's happening now. Like there's this invading ship that's like right there, but you can't see it for what it is.
Can't see it. And so this is quite a visual. Again, this is from the same publication, but it's called Our Commons. And it's quite interesting because in the image, both the U and the N are yellow. So, you've got the United Nations there, like the UN commons or uncommons. I don't know exactly, but you've got some, I don't know, it looks like 18th century sort of botanical illustrations at the bottom, a peach and a violet and some other spray of flowers, and there's hands, and literally they're covered in Bitcoin. Like there's Bitcoins just falling, and there's dragonflies flying around, right? And so you've got the natural world and you're pouring digital gold on it,
I have to go puke for a second because this image is not setting well with me.
But doesn't it embody so much, right? These hands are dropping the digital gold on the natural world.
Yeah.
It'll give you two places to focus. Like, if you're me, you're like, oh, a dragonfly, flower petals. Wait a minute. The investor's looking down going, no, look at the Bitcoin gold. Right? Like, so there's some kind of something for everybody. I thought they were flower petals. It's not. It's Bitcoin pouring out of their hand.
Well, the plants, everything's growing out of I guess it's kind of say the Bitcoin are the soil. I guess is kind of what this is messaging,
Maybe in the metaverse that can be true. Who knows?
Sure.
They can make whatever fantasy they want in there, right? And again, but that's the collectivism versus the individualism, because I think for many people, they imagine Bitcoin as an individual anarcho-capitalist liberation platform, right? And then they're framing it as communal. So what is true? I mean, there's a troubling of that concept, I think. They want you to buy into both that you can be the collective and you can have your individual control as long as it's tokenized. And this is just the power. I keep saying they assert these visions of this whole future as if it is divorced from the current power dynamic. And for me, until the resistance figures out a way to address the way in which this power through financial power, which is embedded in military power and social policy power, is this Aladdin, which is BlackRock's AI computer, right? And so what they're not saying is we're going to have this Green New Deal, but it will be run by the mega master computer that will decide the level of greenness and to tweak it back to homeostasis. And this is what Ervin Laszlo has spoken about in his book, his actually, it was in his lecture to the Baha'i in San Francisco. And it's very much early on, someone had recommended this book, Ira Levin, This Perfect Day. And this is a book from the early 70s. Again, the last time we had, crazy inflation, crazy gas prices. 50 years later, here's the redux. And in this world, it was presenting a world that was run by a supercomputer in a mountain. And that everyone got daily injections that were precision to them and that kept them in the belly of the beast, in the story that was the main story. And then there was this small group of people who broke off. But then the powers that be would leave a boat on the beach so that when you got there, you would go to the island. But then the island was just the containment zone for all of the rebels. Like you felt like you had free will, but they'd left the boat for you to get there, right? So and then they just managed all of the resistance on this island. And so it was all part of this mechanical process. And so what I'm saying is, like, as we're trying to tease this thing apart, we actually have to understand, like, our illusion of money, power, control, where it lies. And if we're just layering new stories on, I had a blog post yesterday and I said, we've allowed this thing to be built centuries, generations upon generations. And now here we are. It's very daunting to figure out how do we tease it apart and actually start to take responsibility, and knowing that in our lifetime, it's never going to be fixed. We can only start to tease it apart. Right. And so that is so overwhelming that most people just simply turn aside and say, can you tell me another story to make me forget this? Like, can I inhabit a story? Because realistically, this is so deeply embedded that who built it? Our family members, our friends, our respected community elders. Almost no one is untouched by this system. And those of who would like to sort of point fingers and say, you were the ones that did this to us, and we're going to take care of you and make it all better. And I'm like, no, I feel like we're all implicated to some degree. These impact finance deals, if you have a 401k, if you pay insurance premiums, if like all of the investments go there, right? If your state government has its money invested in these things, your church has stuff invested there. Everything that's invested will be invested in human capital. And so we actually have to first look, but we have to look together, I think. So.
Yeah. And even that ideological framework of just that concept of human capital, or even capital. I don't even like the word capital. I think it's unnatural and inhuman. I want to change that. Cliff, you were.
Yeah, so for me, the way I would shape this story-wise, it's like pretty much this is the beast, right? They're going to give life into the care of something that's not alive. Right? They're going to give the control and management of life itself, including us, into the care of something that has no life, right? Has no life, can only have a parasitic relationship, and maybe I can find a better word, but a parasitic relationship with us. Something that has no life and will never have life, but will be allowed to fiddle with, play with, and manage life itself, right? That doesn't make it alive. And then this other thing, what I said about it's okay to say there's a monster. There it is. There's a monster. It's okay because it can't actually control us. And what I want to say is that what you just said is so important. It's not that there's somebody that we can kill to make this all right. Like kill Bill or kill so-and-so, and then we can, it's not that at all. Everyone is implicated in this. And so where you have a 401k is where your hands are holding on to it, right? Like it's not, you're not, like you don't know that with your 401k, you're feeding the beast, but you are, right? And so we don't want to kill you. We want to get you to consider the possibility of letting go of your part in maintaining this story, right? Which might look like, in the moment, letting go of what you think it is that takes care of you and protects you. Whatever that the problem is not that it exists, is that we all have a stake in it. And we might want to look at like removing our stake, something about revocation. Like I didn't know made a stake in this, that's what it was. Now that Alison and some other people have helped me to understand, I would like the chance to reconsider, and let go of, take my hand off this thing. Because to me, this doesn't honor life. Giving life to the care of something which will never live, has never lived, will never live, right? It's not, for me, that's not honoring life. And so the one thing I can do is I can look to where it is I'm hanging on to it, and maybe I don't want to do it all by myself. Maybe I'd feel better if some people would join me. I'd feel a little safer letting go if the community around me was starting to look at this and consider letting go of our investment in this way, but it's this thing you said about responsibility. It's here and playing out, not because we're being dominated, but it is just this dominating thing, but because in some place we've given permission, right? And so now you're saying, here's the world that's coming. Do you really want to give permission to this? And some part about taking our permission and saying, no, we don't want to give permission to this, is say, okay, well, given that we're kind of in the belly of this thing, now we have to start and look at where am I actually giving permission to this? Because it's been building for centuries. It's not something in the future. Where do I participate in the current system that actually gives money to BlackRock, that gives money to this decision they've made to give life into the hands of AI? And I would not feel comfortable letting go of my 401k unless my neighbors all said, we're going to do tomatoes and chickens, right? And we're gonna do a promise to each other that goes past our own lifetimes. Some kind of like, we're going to make a generational promise to care for one another. And now you have the beginnings of conversations and stories that could allow people to let go of the dominating thing that they're afraid to. If people would come around them, and a few good neighbors, and we're like, let's make our stand here. Let's make a promise to care for one another. We'll do some of the work to clear up, our arguments in the past, and let's kind of shape some view in which we look after one another. I'm already 60 years old. Can I, some kind of like deep relational bond would allow me to let go of this kind of more infantile, not infantile in a bad way, but this kind of more childish, like, let dad take care of it. I don't want to let BlackRock take care of it. It doesn't feel adult child to me like it's honoring life. So how do I include the people around me, even with different views, in shaping some kind of agreement that we're going to look after each other? We are in possession of life. Let's us do it. Let's not pass the decision to this thing that will never live.
Well, in many ways, it's already happened. I mean, even before the digital version of this thing that's not living, that we've given our power to, was already created in the form of a corporation, or in the form of a government, or even a religious institution. These are like legal. These are bodies, legal fictions that don't actually live in the real world, that we are serving. Anyway, so that was just one thing that I thought of, because then people are like, this stuff's already been around. I'm like, it's true. This is just a new iteration, and a massively expanded version of something that's already existed. So it's not like this is new. It's just it's taking on a new form and a more powerful form, I would argue. And you mentioned the word stake, which is kind of interesting, because that's what they're using to sell this. Again, like, it's stakeholder capitalism, and you're going to have your stake in the form of a token. And where are you going to put your stake? So, like, in many ways, like, we need to burn the stake itself. Like, I don't know. It was just the language. We're always trapped in the language that's presented to us, and then it has different meaning, because when you say stake, they'd be like, that's what we're because some of these guys would that are promoting this would hear that stake and like, yes, it's a stake. When we want to help you place your stake where you feel it's going to be best representing what you are, but it's within their universe. And then you also mentioned, permission. We give this thing permission, but I'm a little more sympathetic to, the fact that, people, yes, we're all participants and we all, choose this thing, but at the same time, there are massive pressures on us to coercive, to go along with it. So, I wouldn't say to someone like, well, you're participating and just stop participating, because it's like really difficult, like, for people to like step out of that. And I'm like, I don't know even like how we do that. But like I've had people say like, what, are we just supposed to get rid of money? We're supposed to like never use money. And I'm like, well, ultimately, yeah, that's where we need to get to. I mean, I'm not saying we don't use money, but certainly the money that they provide us, or the tokens that they're now proposing, absolutely. Like, if we want a healthy, just, regenerative, I don't like the word sustainable, but like a regenerative system and a right relationship, we cannot have that within this framework. It's just not possible. So ultimately, how we get there, I don't know, and let's have that conversation. But we do need to acknowledge it for what it is, and ultimately reject it.
And I think that Alison's storytelling is not just her. I don't mean to just daylight her, but the storytelling of good people is how we bring attention to where we find ourselves to be, especially the storytelling of good people that aren't making you wrong for it. So not saying to someone, you're responsible for this in these ways and make them wrong for that. With this compassion, I understand you grew up in culture and you were surrounded, you were enmeshed in this whole system. So
but it's not just culture. It's you can't eat, you can't clothe yourself, you can't house yourself without, and I struggle with this because I'm like, oh, I need work. People are like, well, you use money. I'm like, yeah, it's not my choice. A lot of our expenses in life don't actually need to even exist. They're artificial. But yeah, I'm in this system where there are people with guns who enforce certain things of even just having a roof over your head.
But it's a bit of a hook for people to use in that moment in the conversation to drive it somewhere else. So, to try to drag you into, well, what are you going to do for money? What are you going to do for, no. Not trying to untangle what would it look like. We're saying the idea doesn't honor life. And if we can land there, then we can begin to have a conversation about ideas and how to honor life. Not give me some specifics for what you would replace it with. It's no, you're going to get dragged off into some side corner. We just want to rest and put this out as clear as possible and answer adults and children. Does this honor life? Yours and mine. If we can answer that in the affirmative, it kind of doesn't. Then we're not pointing fingers you participate here, you participate there. Maybe together, let's choose something that honors life. And it's going to need to include you and your family and mine as well. So maybe we don't have the answer for that because we grew up in a dome, right? Just trying to figure out why we couldn't see straight. So, but to get there, we have to agree to, revoke the control of the dome, to say no, and to put a dandelion on the corporate headquarters and say nope. Right? This is the conversation has to start somewhere. And I don't want to demonize anybody who grew up in a system and was under the dome and being taught these things. I mean, they are our family members. They are, so my family kind of living in, under the dome of what the right way to think is. They've definitely been get away from us. But I don't want to be mad at them. I don't want to make them wrong. I want to win back the love and affection. I sent a picture to my, one of my family members who's kind of rejected me the other day, and it was just me. I was probably 3. I had this little outfit on, these kind of little Swiss pants, and I had this little hat on and this little shirt. And she had this little blue dress on. We were just little tiny kids holding hands, and we were looking at each other like we were joined at the hip. And having been shoved out of the family, I was just I'm just saying, maybe we can win our way back to this simple camaraderie, we're family, so, there's so much value for me when it gets this simple and this clear to see, and so again, I appreciate the storytelling. And I don't want to be drug off into redesigning the world. I want to stay in the realm of, what honors, what is kind, and then can we have a base for a conversation to rise from? I want a new base. This base, I would like to say, no, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I had someone that was on one of the videos, and they were like, "Can you take me off the video?" And then I'm like, "Well, it's kind of hard because I've kind of already put it out there, and it's been shared by a lot of people." And then they messaged me back finally after a while, and they said, "Don't worry about it. I'm willing to stand up and put myself out there that I agree with what you're doing." And we had kind of a conversation about via text about just the challenges of putting yourself out there and taking a stand. And they said, I say no to this. And then I responded, yes, say yes to no. And that opens up space. First you're like a lot of people are like, well, what's the answer? I'm like, I don't know what the answer is. But first of all, you have to acknowledge in your heart and really recognize that this is what this thing actually is, and commit to the idea that this is not what you support. This is not what you're about. And even knowing that okay, I don't know where I go from there. but it's like, that's step one. And people want to be like, well, what's step 5 and 6 and 7? I'm like, I don't know, but let's focus on step 1 right now. Step 1 is just acknowledging this for what it is and saying, no, that's not what I agree with. That's not what I support. That's not what I want. And then we can go from there. I wish I knew where to go from that. I mean, it's a process, and I have like ideas about alternatives, and a lot of people do, and a lot of people are doing things within that. But again, like, you can't skip step 1.
Forgive me, I'll just use a metaphor. You can't see what's next until you step through. The door swings open, the window rises. When you, in the action of that you take to say no thank you, a window opens. Now you can see. It's not there until you take the step into the space. So you have to have a little courage to step into the unknown. Like, people want the certainty of having an answer about how it's all going to turn out if we say no to this. Like, I've been hanging on to this, living through this, whatever. But you don't get to have it until you let go of, because this other thing colors your view. It colors all your future possibilities that you can dream of. You're still under the umbrella. You have to actually step out of the dome, right? And then all of a sudden there's a vista that you couldn't see when you were under it. So, it's just somebody to, like, say, hold my hand, like, will you step with me, right? That's what I feel like Alison says. Like, hey, I'm not compelling anyone. And I'm like, oh, I like you so much. And I step out from under this, like, darkly shaded view that I didn't understand, and I can see it differently. So, the answer is we don't get to know the answer, but kindness and community and a few friends who just have a little bit of courage and step outside the narrative with you, it's like the first part,
Yeah. And by the way, did you know the umbrella was originally just going to be called Umbrella, but then the person that was naming it hesitated. A little dumb dad humor thrown in there.
Oh, good. Little kid energy. I like it.
So, well, we talked about a lot of this stuff already. These are just some images. And, when I went out to South Dakota in the summer of 2020, I had an audiobook about the I can't remember if it was called the Wood Wide Web or whatever, but that was really introducing this idea of these networked systems, right? And this is just it was a short film that someone did about it. But if you're willing to take a deeper dive into some of the fantasies that these folks are having about molecular design and nanomachines and all those sorts of things, like, they're not creators. Like, they think they're creators, but mostly they're just ripping off of actual things that already exist in the world, right? And so they're trying to sort of like cobble together something that's based on existing amazing systems. And so looking at communication technology among the forests, and I do feel like there is something, and some folks have been digging into it more deeply than I have, but about forests and lumber. There's something about that I keep bumping into that is about the communication networking of forests and lumber that are part of this story. And I touched on it a little bit with the Tennessee Eastman buying this lumber and ending up like creating explosive, cellulose products out of it. And one of the key features, Booth Gardner, he was a governor of Washington State, and he was the one who implemented most of these laws that are going to feed into impact networks around early running start education and pre-K and healthcare systems, and I think even assisted suicide. And he got his start in Weyerhaeuser. And then I think the early history of Caltech, that the early money behind Caltech was a lumber company. And Nicholas Berggrun's dad, his first wife, they were Zellerbach paper. So it feels like not just the oil industry, but that the lumber and timber industry is central. And to me, it feels like there maybe is something inherent in sort of the biochemical communication systems that these technologists are really trying to learn more about. And now they have tools that they're deploying. They give them insights that they did not have before. So
I could go on a total wander about forced intelligence, but I love this piece that you said, that you might not have the energy to go down the rabbit hole of like interspecies communication beneath the soil, but it's worth it not to try to understand it, just to see what you saw. These are not creators. These are not creators. They're just ripping off what they can see with their instruments that life is already doing, right? That's not creation, right? They're just looking into the elegance of natural life and going, oh, we learned some ways with which we can control you better. Look at how, like, as if the mushroom's trying to control the tree and dominate the tree. No, it's not, right? So just it's worth it to dive into some of these creaky corners. Just what a beautiful realization. That is not creation. That's not creation. You're just ripping off technology, and the technology is the provenance of life itself, right? You just, I just love that. I love that.
We should do a show. It would be good to do a show about copyright and patent, because that's another kind of area that I've always been really fascinated with, the idea of claiming ownership of things, like of ideas, or even now of life through genetic modification. And I used to talk about like Monsanto and their genetic modification. A big piece of that is not about feeding the world. It's about owning the seeds. Like if you drive through Nebraska or Kansas, all the fields have these little signs alongside of them with saying what the brand of seed it is, which means like all those plants that are growing are owned, not the physical plant, but the DNA, the genetic structure of it itself is owned. And that was kind of the idea behind being able, they couldn't copyright, or a life, so they said, well, we've changed it a little, we've done something to it now, so now we own it. So like that was just, sorry Alison, but I just thought I would throw that out there, the whole copyright and trademark thing about ownership, like we did this, we created this, and I'm like, no you didn't.
But they're very clever, because the other angle that I forgot to mention is, Leo has been looking into this Cello organization that is mobile phone app, UBI, impact investing, data analytics. And they talk about making money beautiful. Money could be beautiful. And then they put all these pictures about how beautiful money. And Sepp Kamvar, who was the head of Google personalization, then ran social computing at MIT. He was the one who came up with the Wildflower Montessori Internet of Things Connected Children pre-K schools. Okay. And so he's with Cello, and he has developed this rapport with Charles Eisenstein. Now, Charles Eisenstein wrote this book on sacred economics, okay? And for a while I thought, well, maybe this guy has ripped off this work of the sacred economics, and like, hey, maybe this guy, Charles Eisenstein, doesn't know, right? He just like got inspired by a book, because I get inspired by books. Like I reference books. I'm not pretending that everybody whose books I've read is in agreement with everything I say. So I was like, well, maybe he doesn't know. And then I realized, like, no, he's doing interviews with him. Like, it's not that it's unknown, that it's an actual agreed upon relationship. And so they're moving into this idea of beautiful, sacred, the gift economy, tokenizing the gift economy, right? And as what you were saying, Cliff, is like, this is relationality. This is sort of this beautiful cosmic dance. They're restructuring that as a tokenized economy. And I'll close out with a clip that illustrates that. But I mean, boom, that's where it goes.
Restructuring it as a tokenized economy. That's their good idea. The miracle of
we could make that more efficient. We could turn that into a market.
We can win. It's like, oh my God, that's just so, like, all of a sudden there's like clarity, just like, oh, it gives. So that's not intelligence. That's not creation. That's a dumbass idea. When you look at the beauty of life and you think we can make it, we can tokenize. It's like, come on. That view is not informed in any elegant way no network of beings are going to listen to that tone and flow your way. Like, you're going to have to trick people to go that way, right? Life won't just like respond like, oh, that feels good, I'm going that way. No, you're going to have to trick them, which is why they have so much lipstick and, whatever. If their
That's
story
Greta.
was such a good story.
Greta's the trick. That's unfortunately that's the ink.
Oh, my
ink
friends, as soon as you say Greta, I'm just like, oh, the children. Yeah, so they wouldn't need all of that manipulation if it was just clearly like something beautiful.
A good idea.
Right?
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah.
I filmed Charles Eisenstein, so I was actually like, in my process, there was a period where I was looking up to a lot of the ideas he was presenting. So it's Sacred Economics, Money, Gift, and Society in the Age of Transition. The idea of a gift economy is something that I'm actually really sympathetic to. I like that that philosophy, but not in a measured, ledgered
Not a gift
way. Yeah. Once you ledgerize it, it ceases to have its value as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
and the thing is like okay.
No, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, it's a process, right? And people make choices, and sometimes they're informed, and sometimes, like, it's possible that Charles Eisenstein didn't know that Sepp Kampfer put Internet of Things sensors in children's slippers and surveillance cameras on the ceiling, right? Before he made this agreement or entered into this relationship, business relationship with him. There, you can make different choices, right? Like, he could make a different choice. Sepp Kampfer could make a different choice, right? He could maybe decide to not scale an Internet of Things Montessori program and say, on retrospect, that isn't actually beautiful or sacred. Everybody, you make choices, and sometimes the choices cause harm, and you have to sort of own up and take responsibility for that. But it doesn't say moving forward, you can't make a different choice. And so I just want to emphasize that. I think sometimes in the making people wrong, it eliminates any chance of redemption or fixing. And that doesn't do anybody any good, like from the way I see it.
Yeah. And to say, I can honor that human beings, Charles Eisenstein and others, are looking and doing and all of that. I can honor them and their life and their attempts to structure things in what they think of as a good way without agreeing with the ideas that they come up with. Not agreeing with their idea doesn't mean I have to dishonor them or dismiss them or discount them in any way. We're just saying at the level of the realm of ideas, we've taken a look at this story that you presented, but we're looking we're also looking at natural life. The miracle that I see there, does it lend itself to this idea of tokenizing beauty and blockchaining children and surveillance stuff? It just doesn't. When I look at the intricate systems of fascia or microbial networks, it doesn't lead me to want to capitalize on it, right? In a way. So we I can honor anybody's conversation and story about it, but I can honor them and their life, but I don't have to honor their ideas. I'm not honoring the conclusions that they've reached. But in doing that, I'm not trying to dishonor them. I want them to arrive someday at a conclusion that feels to me like that they're truly honoring life. I want that for them, and I can hold out that what they're doing now is maybe an attempt to do that. But in community, we get to stand up and say, hey, this thing you created for us, great, thank you. And now we're going to say how it feels for us. We're saying, you made this little thing, this platform, this idea, great. You made it for community, great. Told a lovely story. But now, before we go live in it, we have some things we'd like to say, And if you want to be the shaper of the story, you kind of got to listen to us. Otherwise, you're not the shaper of the story, you're commanding,
Well, and we're getting close to the end. I think this is the second to the last slide. The last one is going to be a clip. And then maybe what we can do a conclusion, but clip. So this is we talked about this image a little bit last night because I was talking about the is it fascia? Is that how you say it? Like the connective tissue. And early on, I had spoken with, I believe it was Sophia Smallstorm was telling me about it, and her considerations about the electromagnetic frequencies and the impact on the connective tissue. And then Cliff, you found this crazy article where they actually describe it as the matrix inside. So on the one hand, we have the fascia.
Sorry.
And then on the other side is just the microbial. So so those are the two, and maybe Cliff, you can sort of speak to this a little bit, but you've got on the one hand more a natural collective system, and then the other, you do have your natural system, but they're projecting onto it this idea of a matrix. And potentially with the things they're trying to develop, they really would like to try to put that matrix of the metaverse internalize it, like to get it internalized to you through their nanomechanisms and to sort of hijack those systems.
Yeah,
but that's community, right?
Yeah. So when I saw the word matrix inside you, so I don't come from, a study of medical biology or anything like that. I thought of culture. I thought of like the matrix, like, why do I not feel like great about them using that word around biology? But it actually has a meaning around biology. I looked it up. And so partly what they're saying in this article is we used to look at just the cells. We used to look at just the bones. There's this other area, this matrix. And what they mean by matrix is the system that surrounds all of the things we've been looking at. The interstitial fluid that supports the more robust physical elements. And so like around connective tissue, fascia, if you open up a body, it looks much like that. It has all these qualities. It's made of certain thing. It wraps everything, and it supports the organs. It supports the heart staying where the heart is. It's connected to a bone here, travels to your hip here, follows to your spine, rides up here. It's a kind of a stringy matrix. And what they mean by that is, so now they're saying maybe we should call it an organ in itself. So science is saying we used to kind of miss it because it was just the stuff that held everything together. And now we're saying the stuff that holds everything together is really interesting, right? So fascia is all of a sudden really interesting. They give a passing nod to Ida Rolf. But if you were, but they talk about it like this as part of this conversation we're having. It's time for some scientists to look at fascia.
Seriously.
There's been a few massage therapists who have been, talking about it, but it's time that science takes a look at it. So there's this woman, Ida Rolf, who, put forward a system called structural integration. Wow, really interesting language about how this fascia that wraps the body gets traumatized and then comes together and pulls your shoulder forward, and now you start walking funny, or you have emotional trauma and you start hunching to hide, and then that fascia gets trained in that position and locks the body in. And she's like, people get hurt or they get their feelings hurt. They start doing these funny things. They get out of balance. Here, just put your hands here. Just hold a little pressure. Feel it start to relax underneath you. And she taught people how to feel the tension in the fascial network or the matrix that holds the body in place, such that you could release it. And they're deep into the study of anatomy. Most of their structural integration, the group is called Rolfer. So I go to one. So my Rolfer and I were laughing at New Scientist magazine. He was actually kind of really glad anyway that people start talking about fascia. But, this idea that now science is going to take a good look at it. And they're polite, just a little bit polite. They kind of like whatever massage therapist, they were sort of polite to Ida Rolf. But like science and technology looking at it is one thing. Living human beings have been putting their hands on one another and feeling into the life of each other for a long time before they did this article, and helping others to stand up and integrate their structure. There's been real progress in understanding and honoring fascia before New Scientists started to say, we're going to study it. So that was just a little bit of dislocation. But it's one of these underlying systems that supports everything in the human body. It's part of the community of systems that the body is. The gut biome is, they're finding now that you have a heart biome, that you have a brain biome, right? So they're starting to understand that these biomes, these matrices, these connective tissues, these spaces in between everything that help hold and balance everything. And I'm saying things like that. We don't have to be a scientist. We're alive. We can look into these living systems and listen to the intelligence and not create a tokenized thing based on it, but we can learn from the existence of real beauty, which is these connective tissue places that hold. That's beautiful. That's beauty. Something in creation that holds all our organs in place, something that holds the stars in the sky. We can look there and discover elegant relational ways that aren't tokenizing children's behavior, right? We can draw value and find pathways and elegant relational dynamics in looking at life, right? We're capable of doing that. We don't have to wait for science to look in and tell us, we looked at the body, now we know what to do with your, we can look. We're alive. We can look. We can feel into it. So this little old lady, she would work on baby pigs. She would work on birds, horses, human beings, anything. Just touching, just with a good understanding of anatomy and listening through her hands. Most people in the structural integration field, they say very little, but they're listening through their biology into your body. It's a wonderful experience. And you come out of there after your car wreck or your thing, and there's no microscopes in the room, and nobody's collecting data. It's just a human being offering a kindness, right, of helping adjust your biological field so that you have more ease and less pain. So I'm just saying that we're capable. We don't have, part of getting out from the umbrella is we're capable. Everyday children, adults are capable of listening into, discovering what's going on with us, checking our own temperature. We can be in a relationship with our own biology and the world around us without it being mediated by experts.
I agree, but I just want to throw out, within that space, there are some con artists and some people that are pulling the wool over people's eyes. That's not to dismiss the potential there and the possibility there, which I'm totally open to.
To be fair, Jason, in every space, right? So in every space.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's actually even, it's just as bad in the professional expert, space. So, yeah, I agree. Well, I had a thought like, I should create a soul-bound NFTs for all my internal organs. Would that be an interesting idea there? Well, they want
to go down to the microbiome.
Right. Well, so I was thinking too, in terms of like the soul-bound token, and I can't remember, there was something that you said, Cliff, that made me think about this when I was reading about the soulbound tokens. Is they're saying you're going to have a soulbound token as an individual, but eventually you'll come together in groups. You'll form different guilds or groups, and then that group itself will have a soul. Will have a token. So it's like tokens upon tokens upon tokens, and
bets upon bets.
Yeah, exactly. And and this goes into the representative, like the token that represents you, and then the token that represents your group. Anyway, I was just thinking about that.
So I will just reemphasize, this is part of the same event that was the clip with the person talking about, it's about data, it's about biodiversity, but we have to put it in the right domain, and the emphasis on domain. So now she's talking about it's coming off of talking about using quantum dots to track mycelial networks and the communication and exchange of carbon and phosphorus, and where she thinks this is all going under the rubric of the climate.
Understand this fungal behavior and understand how we can use this information as we face all of these changes in our climate. Now, these are symbiotic fungal networks. So what they do is they're exchanging carbon that they get from root systems for fungi, for phosphorus that the fungi are foraging for in the soil. Now, there's billions of these hyphae under an acre of forest, and there's tens of billions of these hyphae under an acre of grassland. So they are incredibly, incredibly vast. So anywhere between 30 and 50% of the living biomass of these soils is these arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. Now, I think a lot of people don't understand just how much this leads to intense carbon stocks underground. So this is a paper that was in Science in 2019, and it just gives a snapshot of what you're looking at in terms of carbon stocks of tropical rainforests versus tundra underground. So understanding the underground is really paramount to our future. Now, here's another tool that we're developing in our lab that allows us to actually make these X-ray 3D scans of the interactions between fungal networks and roots. Now, this is really important for all different kinds of domains, because when you think about it, it's up to about 80% of the phosphorus in plants is provided by these fungal networks. Now, that's exciting because what it means is that the DNA that actually makes up our own DNA, human DNA, is mostly made out of phosphorus that first passed through a fungal network. So what we're trying to do is understand the strategies of these fungal networks, right? Our lab is interested in trying to track resource exchange between plants and fungi, trying to quantify how much of that resources are exchanged, and then predict, right? Predict how these underground flows are going to respond to climate change. And in that sort of looking forward, we're at this really interesting part of biological, I'd say, history, where we're moving from a very old sort of paradigm of microbial behavior as sort of standalone asocial organisms to microbes as social actors, right? Performing very complex behaviors. And this is how we're approaching the study of fungal networks. So we're really interested in trying to understand how information across these fungal networks, how it's processed and how it's shared, and how that leads to different strategies across different types of fungal networks. Now, when you think about it, symbiotic fungal networks, they have to do a few different things, and these things are very complicated. So that's why it makes it a really interesting model organism to study. So first, it has to create an infrastructure, right? It has to create an infrastructure to actually go out in the soil and collect resources. Next, it has to evaluate where you would actually transport those resources for trade. And next, it has to collect payment for those resources to get a good price. So again, these are all the types of strategies that we are focused on understanding. Now, the problem is that we've been very focused on looking at fungal networks in a laboratory setting. And what that means is that we don't really understand the context of trade, right? Trade strategies are predicted to shift, even if there's just a small change in, let's say, available resources in the soil, or how fast a plant may be growing, how much photosynthesis is happening above ground. And bringing up that type of complexity is very difficult, right? We don't understand the chemical, the physical, the environmental stimuli that's actually mediating these trade strategies. And so this is my first meme I've ever done in my life, but I like it because it's really a bit about a poker game, right? So this is what we're trying to understand, is this trade for carbon to phosphorus, and you've got the plant root on one side and the fungal network on the other, and they've been doing this for 450 million, I get shivers thinking, 450 million years. How could we not be studying the strategies that have evolved, right? And so this is me in the corner, just trying to watch. And I would argue that a lot of what's been happening is in the dark, right? In these systems, it's totally underground. So it's very, very hard to understand and track these trade strategies. So what we've been trying to do in my group is actually try to visualize trade. And it sounds like a big task, and it is, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But one of the tools that we've been using are these in vitro root organ cultures, right? So this is what you're looking at right now. And you're looking at a plant root that has no photosynthetic top, right? This plant root is growing on an agar medium. It gets its carbon from the media, and then it converts the carbon into a form that it can feed the fungal network. So what's important to know about these networks is that they're called obligate biotrophs, right? It's a big word, but basically it just means that they rely on their host plant for all of their carbon, their sugars and their fats. And so we grow it in the lab, in this system, where the fungal network is in this very pristine environment, but it also allows us to have an extraordinary amount of ability to manipulate the situation. And the next sort of technique that we have been working with is a technology called quantum dots. Now, quantum dots are these semiconducting nanoparticles, and they fluoresce in very pure, bright colors when they're exposed to a UV source. And we can tag those quantum dots onto resources, like apatite, which is a rock form of phosphate. And what this allows us to do is actually then study how resources are moved across the network, because you can use different colors. So right now we've got about 3 colors that we can work with, and this allows us to sort of change. For example, we can add the different colors at different times, or we can add the colors at different places in space. And then we can for the first time, sitting at that poker table, kind of understand the strategies that these fungal networks exhibit. And over the years, we found some very interesting strategies, right? And you have to remember, these are all strategies that have existed, right, without cognition, all in the absence of cognition. So we found that fungi are very good at discriminating among plant roots, right? They can tell a plant that's giving them lots of carbon versus one that's giving them very few carbon. We also know that when you reward fungi with carbon, this triggers more cooperation. So in this case, it provides more nitrogen. The fungus ends up giving more nitrogen to the host root. One of the most interesting ideas is this hypothesis that fungi can actually restrict the autonomy of root systems. So what that means is that the fungi can get into a root system and actually down-regulate the ability of the plant's own nutrient transporters to take up resources from the environment. So basically hijacking the plant's own nutrient uptake system. But that works perfectly for the fungi, because then they're getting plenty of carbon, and the plant becomes even more dependent on the fungi.
Oh my God.
It's kind of intense, right?
Oh, man.
Right.
Where do we start?
I know. Well, you know what? So what I might do is just give my closing wrap up, and then I can leave you guys if you want to, because you may have more to say about this than I have time. But I think, again, this framing, it's the poker table, right? The trading strategies. And then even at the end, the fungi can figure out how to game the system and get stuff out and exert its dominance on the tree. And Cliff, you had totally before, talking about the cooperative relationship. And she goes right for the initial thing is how do we control that thing, right? And so, and even in the diagrams where they were talking about building infrastructure and trade, that's a smart city. Those little diagrams that she was laying out were little houses and streets and trees. And so they're putting this sort of, this lens, right? This, through a lens darkly application on ancient biological functioning systems. There's probably nothing more effective at remediating man's mistakes than fungal networks, right? And so this tendency towards domination. And so I'm going to have to hop off, but I think, I hope across these hours of our conversation, the level of complexity, community, collaboration at all scales is very, comes through. And in that way, and I believe, we are all connected across time and space and energetically. So, I really do, want to honor Nikki Rapana's vast contributions and the amount of effort that she put into pulling together, synthesizing, being on the front lines of communities, trying to tell the story. I empathize greatly with the frustration of trying to tell a story the world doesn't seem ready to hear yet. And so I just want to extend my appreciation, my condolences to her community, into which we're all connected, and to say thank you for holding space and making space for us to continue the conversation and sort of build on that work. So, yeah. Thanks, everyone. I'm gonna turn it over to these two capable folks to continue.
I'm just going to say goodbye as well. I think that was a perfect ending. We could go on for this about days, but if somebody got this far and can't see the hilarity in this piece, then that's another conversation. Yeah. But thank you so much, Alison, for what you're up to. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you both for joining us. And I just wanted to point out, just the influence of economic thought. Seeing everything through economics, carbon stocks, trade, price, and then poker, of course, like the absurdity of that. So there's a foundation that this is being built upon that I think is problematic to begin with. But anyways, thank you guys for doing this, and thanks everyone for listening. Cheers. All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.